For the past 6 months, 3I Atlas has been one of the most closely monitored interstellar objects in our solar system. NASA, ESA, JAXA, and India's ISRO have all tracked its strange course as it skirted near Mars, slower than expected, brighter than modelled, and showing surface reflections that don't align with standard cometary physics. But last week, something changed. A new set of images was released to internal data channels, images taken by deep space monitoring systems that never reach the public directly. Within an hour of those uploads, every major space agency restricted access to their live data feeds. The public dashboards showing 3I Atlas's trajectory went blank. Even the European Space Agency's routine comet tracking logs were pulled without notice. No explanations, no maintenance alerts, just a synchronized silence. That alone would have sparked attention, but astronomers who had briefly seen the data before it vanished described something they had never encountered before. Frames showing 3I Atlas surrounded by faint arcs of distortion, not debris, not reflected sunlight, but a subtle bending of light around the object itself. To those who study lensing effects, that description raises immediate questions. Light doesn't bend like that unless something massive, or something unusual, is interfering. No one is calling it gravitational lensing, not yet. But the fact that such a term even circulates in early internal notes is enough to change the tone of this entire mission. So, what does it mean when all public imaging goes offline right after something like this appears? Usually it means the data needs verification. Every space agency, especially NASA and ESA, has strict review protocols for anything that might cause public confusion. But the speed of this blackout, the way it cascaded across different networks, doesn't look procedural. It looks deliberate. Independent astronomers are now left guessing. Those with mid-range telescopes aimed toward Mars's orbit report that 3I Atlas seems to have dimmed in visible light, but brightened slightly in infrared, a strange reversal that could mean a temperature surge, an outgassing event, or something we simply don't understand yet. Whatever's happening, it's not behaving like a dying comet. It's evolving. And that's what draws the question everyone's avoiding. If this is a natural object, why the coordinated silence? Before we continue, if you're following this story night after night, these strange patterns, the unexplained blackouts, and the quiet behavior of agencies that rarely stay quiet, let us know where you're watching from. Whether you're in New York during your evening commute or drifting to sleep in Tokyo, your curiosity keeps this story alive and brings context to the unknown. Now, back to the data. The original 3I Atlas monitoring network, a collaboration between NASA's Deep Space Communications Complex and ESA's Gaia Relay, was transmitting routine photometric readings up until 0312 UTC. At 00313, a data flag appeared in the log. Spectral anomaly detected. Within 2 minutes, access was revoked for all external researchers. The anomaly, according to a single archived checksum file, appeared across multiple wavelengths. That means it wasn't a glitch in one camera, it was systemic. This kind of consistency is what makes it strange. Glitches don't repeat across instruments thousands of kilometers apart. That suggests the anomaly isn't in the sensors, it's in the subject. Some theorists propose that 3I Atlas could be ejecting materials that interfere with optical readings, a layer of reflective dust, for instance, that refracts light in odd ways. But the recorded symmetry of the distortion contradicts that. This wasn't scattered, it was patterned, and symmetrical distortion implies structure. If that's true, then something about the object's surface, or the space immediately surrounding it, is shaping light deliberately. That's what's hard to ignore. Even now, private radio observatories in Australia and Chile continue to scan the region, picking up brief, faint bursts of radio noise, just static, repeating roughly every 70 seconds. Not a signal in the communicative sense, but regular enough to raise eyebrows. The timing correlates suspiciously well with 3I Atlas's rotation rate, measured weeks earlier. If these bursts are real and not instrumentation error, we could be looking at an entirely new form of natural emission, or the first instance of an interstellar body interacting with magnetic fields in a way we've never modelled. Either explanation rewrites the rules, and that may be exactly why the silence began. Hours after the data blackout, a small but telling clue appeared. A maintenance notice quietly posted on the European Space Agency's back-end system mentioned unverified optical signatures. The phrase sounds routine, almost procedural, But to those who understand the language of internal communication, it means the data contained something inconsistent with standard physical modeling. Usually, that kind of phrase is reserved for optical illusions, reflections, misreadings, digital interference. Yet in this case, the anomaly appeared in multiple wavelength bands simultaneously. That removes coincidence. Meanwhile, amateur astronomers across Europe reported a faint, diffuse glow near the coordinates where 3I Atlas had last been confirmed. Not a new object exactly, more like an envelope of light surrounding a darker core. Some described it as a soft halo, others compared it to aurora-like motion. There's a quiet debate forming among those who saw it. Was it just solar wind interacting with expelled gases? Or did the comet itself become partially shrouded in material of an unfamiliar kind? The truth is, no one can confirm anything, because the professionals who could have are no longer speaking publicly. Within scientific circles, silence often signals ongoing analysis. The data gets locked, reviewed, and passed between departments before any statement is made. But this silence has stretched beyond the usual window. Days have turned into weeks, and the automated tracking systems, normally updated hourly, still show no new positional data. It's as if 3I Atlas has been erased from the charts, and yet it hasn't vanished. Observers from Chile's Atacama Desert recorded a weak reflection on the 23rd hour of the second day after the blackout. Their photometric readings suggest that the object may have fragmented, or that another body of similar mass has entered the field of view. In astronomy, either scenario is remarkable. If fragmentation occurred, it would explain the loss of consistent signals, but if a second object appeared near it, then we might be seeing something far rarer: interaction. Some theorists are beginning to use the phrase co-moving bodies, meaning two separate objects traveling together at nearly identical speeds and vectors. That has precedent. Binary asteroids exist, as do paired comets. But the difference here lies in the behavior. 3I Atlas, by all earlier readings, didn't have the spin or composition to maintain a stable companion orbit. If it does now, something must have changed, either within it or around it. Independent analysts are also studying residual radio data that continued to stream from ground-based receivers long after official networks went dark. The 73-second interval pattern remains. Strangely, in the hours following the blackout, those intervals became more defined, as though the interference refined itself into a narrower, sharper rhythm. It's as if the noise found a frequency. A few cautious voices within the astronomy community have started referring to it as a rotational modulation, the same term used to describe repeating emissions from pulsars or magnetically active bodies. But 3I Atlas doesn't have the mass, the speed, or the energy to emit at that scale. The math simply doesn't fit, which leads to an unsettling possibility. What if it's not the object itself producing the emissions, but something interacting with it? If this pattern holds, it could represent the first observational evidence of an unknown mechanism, one that manipulates magnetic fields or light at distances we can barely measure. And that would explain the blackout. Before any agency risks making a statement that challenges the known structure of physics, the data would need to be verified beyond any doubt. Meanwhile, in the absence of clarity, theories multiply. Some suggest that the blackout is protective, that the agencies are preventing the spread of misinterpretation. Others, less charitable, think it's containment, a deliberate effort to suppress information until the implications are fully understood. Neither theory can be confirmed. What can be confirmed is this: since the blackout began, none of the global deep space telemetry systems have shown a single update on 3I Atlas. Even citizen access radar arrays report null returns. It's like watching a conversation end mid-sentence. And yet, beneath that silence, a quiet coordination persists. Multiple observatories have scheduled overlapping observation windows, as though waiting for a trigger. Perhaps the moment when the object re-emerges from behind Mars's orbit. When it does, the next sequence of images will answer one of two questions. Did we lose sight of a natural comet behaving unpredictably, or did we glimpse something that forced even the world's best instruments to look away? The implications reach far beyond curiosity. For astronomers, this blackout could become a case study in how the global space network reacts to anomalies. For the public, it becomes a test of patience in the face of uncertainty. Silence can feel ominous, but it can also mean preparation. Somewhere, in a sealed research server, the images that caused this are being examined frame by frame, each pixel measured, each fluctuation modeled. In that quiet, something extraordinary might be unfolding. If history teaches anything, it's that every great discovery begins as an anomaly, something that refuses to fit neatly into theory. 3I Atlas may simply be another cosmic traveler behaving oddly under solar stress, or it may mark a turning point in how we understand interstellar visitors altogether. We've seen this pattern before. Oumuamua's acceleration, Borisov's disintegration, the phosphine traces on Venus, all moments where science caught a glimpse of the unexpected and paused to catch its breath. This is that pause, and soon we'll know what comes after it. In the days following the blackout, something curious began to appear, not in space, but in conversation. Several independent astronomers, mostly those running private observatories, started to notice gaps in their automated logging systems. Timestamps were missing, recordings from nights that should have been routine contained corrupted intervals as though the feed had been interrupted mid-collection. At first, it was dismissed as a software error. But when these disruptions aligned almost perfectly across multiple continents, attention sharpened. It was too synchronized to be coincidence. If this were an isolated observatory glitch, the data would diverge. But the disruptions occurred during the same sidereal window, the exact time Earth rotated that sector of sky into view. In practical terms, that means something interfered with ground-based observation of 3I Atlas from multiple angles at once. The simplest explanation is atmospheric interference, perhaps solar flare activity. Yet solar readings from the same period show no significant bursts, no geomagnetic storms. So, what kind of event could obscure optical and radio data simultaneously without any visible energy spike? That question has no easy answer. Amid the speculation, one internal leak from an ESA contractor slipped through, a line of metadata referencing active reflectivity variance. The phrase appears only once in public logs, yet it suggests the object itself altered its reflectivity between frames. In other words, 3I Atlas may have changed how it interacts with light, as though its surface composition or orientation shifted in ways inconsistent with standard cometary rotation. If true, it would imply that the object is reacting, whether to sunlight, to solar wind, or to something we haven't yet modelled. A few observers pointed out a detail most missed. During earlier observations, 3I Atlas reflected light in predictable patterns, consistent with an irregular, tumbling body. But just before the blackout, that tumbling pattern smoothed. The variation flattened. It began reflecting light like a stable, uniform object. That's not how natural fragments behave. When something stabilizes its rotation in open space, it suggests torque, an applied force, or an internal shift in mass distribution. Either way, it signals change. The agencies remain silent, but deep in research forums, quiet collaboration continues. Code fragments appear in anonymous repositories, scripts for spectral reconstruction, attempts to rebuild the lost visual field from archived checksum data. These efforts show remarkable ingenuity, using checksum discrepancies to reverse engineer pixel changes, an approach that could reveal what the censored images actually contained. It's digital archaeology at its purest. And among the fragments emerging from those reconstructions, one pattern stands out. Several independent models, using different algorithms, all show the same faint ring around 3I Atlas's core. Not a tail, not an emission jet, a symmetrical band, aligned perpendicular to its direction of travel. If real, that could represent a field of ionized particles trapped in an electromagnetic structure, something like a halo under confinement. That alone would make 3I Atlas unlike any comet ever recorded. But what if the ring isn't surrounding it? What if it's forming because of it? The implications run deep. A body generating its own electromagnetic field strong enough to trap charged particles would challenge almost every known model of interstellar debris. It would behave less like a rock and more like a reactor, converting solar radiation into something else entirely. Scientists stop short of using that language, but between the lines of their research, you can sense the discomfort. When something acts both natural and engineered, classification becomes impossible. And then comes the simplest, yet most haunting observation: the trajectory of 3I Atlas has stopped decaying. Under solar drag, all comets slow down slightly as they approach the inner system. Their tails grow, their jets push against sunlight, Their orbital energy shifts subtly downward, but according to archived telemetry, 3I Atlas's velocity has remained steady, not slowing, not accelerating, just constant. It's like it found a balance point within the sun's gravitational field, a position neither drawing it in nor pushing it away. That balance is mathematically improbable, unless the object has properties counteracting the sun's influence. For anyone steeped in orbital mechanics, that's the part that stands out the most, because a body in perfect equilibrium within a variable field shouldn't exist, unless it's being maintained. Amateur astronomers continue to track the region visually, even though no new official data has been released. Some report faint pulses visible only through infrared filters. Others describe periodic dimming across an expanding radius, almost as if something unseen is forming a sphere of interference around the original source. These observations can't yet be verified, but the consistency between reports, coming from observers thousands of kilometers apart, cannot be ignored. As curiosity deepens, so does the quiet unease. Forums dedicated to astronomy have shifted tone from excitement to restraint. Every discussion circles back to the same question. If this were merely a comet, why hide the images? What could possibly appear in a photograph so ordinary agencies worldwide would decide to remove it from view? The most grounded minds suspect something simple, perhaps a calibration error that made the object appear to move impossibly fast, or a data overlay showing an artifact that doesn't exist. But even if that's true, the silence surrounding it is creating its own gravity, drawing speculation the way the sun draws comets. Because when institutions stop talking, the void fills itself. And yet, beneath all this speculation, something subtler is happening. The absence of data has drawn a different kind of observation, emotional. People watching these events from afar, late at night, begin to feel something that defies metrics. A reminder that space is still alive, still full of mysteries untouched by algorithms or clarity, that no matter how advanced our technology becomes, the universe retains the capacity to surprise us. That feeling, quiet, unnerving, almost reverent, is exactly what makes stories like this endure. Because what began as a small interstellar visitor has now become a mirror, reflecting our own limits back at us. And that's the part no blackout can hide. 3 nights later, for the first time since the blackout, data packets began quietly reappearing in the European Space Agency's mirror servers. They weren't public reports, only checksum tables, numbers designed to confirm data integrity. But analysts quickly noticed something strange. The new checksums didn't match the previous datasets. That means either the data had been recalibrated or entirely replaced. In the world of scientific archiving, both options are rare. Independent researchers tried to cross-reference the timestamps with deep space radar logs from the Australian Square Kilometre Array. Those logs showed an anomaly, a faint return signal arriving 6 minutes earlier than expected, as though the reflecting body had shifted position slightly closer to the inner solar system. 6 minutes doesn't sound like much, but at interplanetary scales, it translates to thousands of kilometers. The shift was too precise, too linear to be natural drift. Something was influencing 3I Atlas's path. Meanwhile, a quiet notice appeared on NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory servers, all instruments recalibrated to remove false reflections. That line, short as it is, sent the small online astronomy community into debate. False reflections usually refer to stray light or sensor noise, but multiple instruments on separate satellites recorded the same readings. To call all of them false seems almost defensive. It's the linguistic equivalent of closing the blinds. Then, at precisely 0247 UTC, a private array in New Mexico recorded a narrow-band radio spike from the same region. It wasn't complex enough to be a message. It lacked modulation or recognizable structure, yet it repeated with clock-like precision, every 73 seconds, again and again, just as before. Only this time, the amplitude increased slightly with each cycle, as though the source were growing stronger or nearer. The operators published their data within hours. By dawn, their servers were unreachable. This is how information fades in the digital era, not through censorship, but through silence that spreads faster than rumor. When data disappears, people begin watching the watchers. Across online networks, users noticed that the public API endpoints for several sky survey programs now return blank frames when queried for the region near Mars. The logs remain, but the images are missing, blank tiles, uniform black. Within professional circles, a few astronomers began to speak, carefully, anonymously. One email, later verified, described the last set of unfiltered images before removal. According to the author, the photos showed a faint geometric pattern near 3I Atlas, barely visible unless the exposure was enhanced. The structure resembled concentric arcs, expanding outward like ripples on water. The moment they enhanced it further, the arcs vanished, replaced by distortion lines across the frame, as if the image itself resisted being viewed. That phrase, resisted being viewed, haunts the forums now. It doesn't fit scientific language, but it fits the feeling spreading through the community. Not fear exactly, but the awareness that something is happening beyond interpretation. Meanwhile, Mars itself continues to behave strangely. Seismic monitors from past landers register faint tremors every few hours, too rhythmic to be coincidence, too gentle to mark tectonic activity. The pattern matches the timing of those 73-second bursts when adjusted for distance and propagation delay. For planetary scientists, that correlation is difficult to dismiss. It suggests a link, an exchange of energy or resonance between the object and the planet it passed. If 3I Atlas is emitting something, even something non-directional, it might be interacting with Mars's thin atmosphere or magnetic remnants in ways unseen before. And if that's true, then the data blackout isn't just about privacy. It's about control of interpretation, control of fear, control of what the public believes the universe can and cannot do. Because if an interstellar object can influence a planet's behavior simply by passing near it, the implications reach far beyond curiosity. It would redefine planetary interaction and the very boundary between passive motion and active presence. But beneath the scientific possibilities lies something simpler, more human, the discomfort of not knowing. For decades, space exploration has been built on transparency. Every image, every anomaly, shared openly to advance understanding. Now, in this sudden quiet, people sense a reversal. The more we learn, the less we're told. And that silence breeds imagination. Outside official circles, small observatories continue their watch. One operator in Argentina reports that 3I Atlas has begun to pulse, not in brightness, but in spectral color. Infrared readings fluctuate gently, oscillating between warmer and cooler tones as though the surface temperature rises and falls in cycles. It could be venting gas, it could be rotation, or it could be something entirely new. Those who follow the data long enough develop a kind of intuition, an instinct for patterns. Right now, that instinct says we're standing at the edge of one. Every few years, the cosmos presents an object that doesn't fit, a reminder that knowledge isn't a wall, but a window. This is one of those moments, and somewhere behind that window, 3I Atlas keeps moving, steady, unhurried, silent, while the world that discovered it argues about what to believe. A week after the first checksum anomalies, something unexpected surfaced, not from NASA, ESA, or any official observatory, but from an unlikely source, a university archive server in Prague. A single unlisted file appeared for less than 20 minutes before it was taken down. It contained a low-resolution image set titled Atlas Mars Prox 12, no metadata, no accompanying notes, just 5 frames, each time-stamped exactly 1 hour apart. Within minutes, those who downloaded it began analyzing every pixel. What they found raised more questions than it answered. At first glance, the images looked ordinary, a faint smear of light, Mars in the distance, the typical wash of sensor noise. But when contrast was enhanced, a faint distortion became visible near the center, a subtle curve of light bending around darkness. Gravitational lensing can do that, but the curvature seemed too localized, too sharp, as if light itself had been redirected. The frames showed that distortion moving, not across the image but expanding outward, like a shadow growing from within. The following morning, the archive page was gone, replaced by a notice citing maintenance of outdated datasets, the kind of phrasing that hides more than it reveals. But by then, the images had spread quietly through academic channels. They weren't public, but every astronomer who saw them noticed the same thing. 3I Atlas didn't look like a solid body anymore. It looked diffuse, structured, as if it had begun to change shape. How does an interstellar object change shape? The leading explanation, as always, was natural. Perhaps the comet had fragmented under solar stress. Perhaps its icy core was venting rapidly, creating the illusion of morphing geometry. That would be the easy answer, except the outer layer seemed to remain perfectly symmetrical. A perfect, expanding circle of light and void. The odds of that being random are almost nil. Meanwhile, telemetry data from amateur radar in Poland detected a strange echo when aimed near Mars's orbit. Not a reflection, but a pulse returning at slightly different frequencies each time. It wasn't consistent with known natural reflections, more like a modulated interference pattern, the kind radar engineers usually associate with feedback from metallic structures. Yet, 3I Atlas is supposed to be ice and dust. Nothing about its known composition could produce such coherence. The scientific instinct, of course, is to find error. Instruments fail, software misreads, timing offsets compound. But this time, the anomalies are multiplying too neatly to dismiss. They all point to one conclusion that no one wants to voice out loud. 3I Atlas is doing something, not passively drifting, not decaying, acting. For decades, the study of interstellar visitors has been rooted in detachment. Observe, record, explain. But now, each dataset seems to arrive like a reply. Data echoing data, patterns folding over one another, as if responding to our observation itself. This idea has no proof, but it unsettles those who understand how finely tuned these instruments are. To see feedback on this scale, something must be aware of the observation. Even if not conscious in any human sense, it behaves like a system reacting to being watched. And yet, none of this makes the headlines. The world remains mostly unaware that an object once catalogued as a comet now refuses to act like one. Agencies say nothing. Academic journals delay publication. Conferences quietly remove panels that mention 3I Atlas. It's not suppression by decree. It's absence by hesitation, everyone waiting for someone else to speak first. But the silence is thinning. Inside data logs recovered from a partially mirrored European system, researchers found text headers marked Atlas, phase drift confirmed. It's only a label, but within astrophysics, that phrase carries meaning. Phase drift describes the moment when a body's position begins to shift from predicted motion, not by chance, but by internal cause. Something within 3I Atlas is altering its own orbit. At this stage, scientists would usually rerun orbital models to correct prediction errors. But there's a complication. The new drift isn't random. It's precise. So precise, in fact, that the altered trajectory avoids several gravitational wells it should have naturally crossed. It's as if the object is steering, not dramatically, but subtly, correcting its own path to maintain a balance within the solar system's fabric. And that's where the language stops being scientific and starts becoming philosophical, because the concept of self-correction implies agency, not life, not intelligence necessarily, but process, purpose, a feedback loop between motion and environment, a silent dialogue written in gravity and light. When the first rumors of this phase drift reached independent communities, reactions divided sharply. Some dismissed it outright as human error, the result of corrupted positional data. Others compared it to similar anomalies from Oumuamua's passage years ago, when unexplained acceleration forced physicists to rewrite their equations. But this time feels different, longer, closer, tangible, as if the cosmos itself is holding its breath. And still, Mars trembles. The seismic activity continues, small rhythmic pulses that follow no tectonic logic. Planetary scientists analyzing older InSight lander data now admit something unexpected. The vibrations started weeks before 3I Atlas even entered the Martian neighborhood. That timing doesn't make sense. It implies anticipation rather than reaction. How could a planet tremble before its visitor arrives? That question alone is enough to fracture consensus. And in those cracks, new theories take root, quietly, privately. Some speak of resonance fields, of matter responding to gravitational harmonics before visual contact. Others wonder if Mars's core, though mostly dormant, may still be capable of reacting to external magnetic triggers. None of these ideas have evidence yet, but all of them share one thing: a growing realization that something is linking these events, unseen but measurable. Meanwhile, a small note from an astronomer at the European Southern Observatory circulates quietly among colleagues. Signal still present, frequency stable, amplitude climbing. That's all it says. No charts, no context. But those 3 short lines carry the weight of revelation. Because if the signal persists and strengthens, it means that whatever happened during the blackout wasn't an end. It was a beginning. And in the stillness that follows, you can almost feel the universe turning its attention back toward us. By the time whispers of phase drift reached academic circles, something else had already shifted, not in the data, but in the behavior of the agencies themselves. NASA's Deep Space Network adjusted its scheduling without explanation. Windows once dedicated to deep space probes like Voyager and New Horizons were suddenly reallocated to priority target observation. On paper, that can mean anything, but astronomers who monitor those schedules know how rare it is for an uncrewed object to receive such priority. Then came the procurement logs. Hidden in plain sight, they told a quiet story, a series of emergency contracts authorized for high-bandwidth telemetry, cold storage arrays, and redundant communication lines. It was the kind of infrastructure you build not for a single mission, but for continuous, high-volume data flow. The sort you'd need if you were monitoring something changing too fast to predict. The public might never notice, but the academic world did. Forum posts turned careful, phrased like riddles to avoid moderation. Has anyone else lost access to Mars imaging feeds? Does anyone know why DSN-43 is pinging non-satellite coordinates? No one answers directly, but every scientist knows the code. When professionals stop using plain language, it's not because they lack words, it's because they're buying time. In the meantime, the media stays curiously quiet. A few outlets run small features about anomalous readings near Mars, but most vanish within hours. Articles archived one day reappear the next with edited titles, reframed, softened, stripped of technical terms. To the casual reader, it looks like nothing. To anyone watching closely, it feels like an erasure in progress. And then, without warning, the European Space Agency publishes a brief technical statement. Ongoing analysis of transient visual distortions detected near Mars' heliocentric position. No current risk to spacecraft operations. That one line, transient visual distortions, triggers an immediate response from the astrophysics community. Visual distortions require an optical medium, yet space between Mars and Earth is almost empty. So what medium, exactly, is distorting? In the hours after the statement, satellites monitoring cosmic microwave background interference record a thin band of fluctuation passing through the Martian orbital plane. It lasts less than 6 hours, moving like a wave. Instruments describe it as temperature deviation, but the pattern repeats precisely every 18.6 minutes, too regular to be thermal noise. The realization comes slowly. The agencies aren't ignoring the phenomenon. They're chasing it. Across tracking stations, small inconsistencies begin to align. Each agency is looking at a slightly different segment of the same field. ESA, NASA, JAXA, even private firms like SpaceX and Blue Origin all quietly redirect their sensors to similar coordinates. They've gone off-grid publicly, but privately they're staring at the same patch of sky. Then, data analysts notice something that changes the tone entirely. Mars's orbit prediction tables are subtly rewritten across multiple planetary databases, only by a few decimals, but enough to indicate recalibration of the planet's barycentric motion. In other words, something is tugging on Mars. The correction is tiny, less than the gravitational pull of a mid-sized asteroid, yet statistically undeniable. If a force that small can alter a planet's orbital precision, it must be close. And there's only one object near enough to account for it. 3I Atlas. That's when an unmarked update appears on ESA's public GitHub mirror, a commit labeled Trajectory Model Revision 9b. No authors, no changelog, just new parameters. When reverse engineered, the data points reveal an orbital path subtly coiling around Mars, forming an elongated spiral. That means one thing: 3I Atlas isn't leaving, it's slowing, looping, adjusting. A natural body shouldn't behave like that. Every comet, every asteroid that passes near a planet either slingshots away or crashes inward. Nothing stays in near-stable orbit without external assistance. But here, in mathematical silence, the numbers whisper that something might. As hours turn into days, amateur astronomers begin reporting faint glows on the Martian night side, flashes of light that appear and vanish without pattern. They could be lens flares, they could be nothing, but there's a pattern in the timing. The flashes correspond exactly to moments when the 73-second signal reaches its maximum amplitude. In other words, Mars is responding. Inside the agencies, people must be seeing this. They must be watching the same timing correlations, the same synchronized pulses. Yet, their outward behavior remains calm, a calculated calm. Every briefing ends with the same phrase: no cause for concern. That repetition, identical across organizations, feels almost rehearsed, and still the public listens, because humans have a natural instinct for when someone's withholding something. In this silence, in this rehearsed restraint, the story has already outgrown the data. It's no longer about what 3i Atlas is doing, it's about what the institutions are afraid it might mean. The global astronomy community is divided in two now, those with data and those without. The gap between them grows daily, yet through that gap, leaks continue to slip. One comes from a technician in Darmstadt, a single line of text posted anonymously: reflectivity increasing exponentially. That phrase travels faster than any image could. Reflectivity increasing, that means the object is brightening, not fading. And if it's brightening without proximity change, it's not sunlight doing it, it's self-emission. Within 48 hours, the last public observation thread about 3i Atlas is locked, but in private, people keep sharing raw data, frame by frame, line by line, and somewhere within that quiet exchange, a consensus forms, tentative, uneasy, unspoken. Whatever's happening near Mars isn't over, it's accelerating. Within a week, silence itself became suspicious. For months, every new image of 3i Atlas had been shared publicly within hours, cropped, filtered, captioned. Now, not a single new frame reached public databases. Even casual stargazers, people who spent nights cataloguing celestial traffic, began noticing blank spaces. The online sky mapping tools that once showed Mars surrounded by subtle data points now displayed nothing but a void. At first, it felt like a technical glitch. Then the glitch began spreading. Entire regions of space in near-Mars proximity were omitted from open-access data streams. Every night, someone else noticed the same gap. Every morning, another patch of sky went dark. And yet, those who watched carefully saw faint traces the filters missed. A soft glow, not from Mars itself, but from just beyond its limb. A diffuse shimmer that pulsed once every few minutes. It wasn't bright, but it was consistent. The frequency matched earlier reports of that repeating signal. 73 seconds, perfectly timed, cycling endlessly. Amateurs began compiling synchronized observation logs, layering data from across continents. When stitched together, the pulses formed a rhythm like breathing. Something, or perhaps the object itself, was repeating, adjusting, responding. And the moment the collective analysis began gaining traction, entire threads vanished, discussion boards locked, archive pages deleted, only cached copies remained, passed quietly between astronomers as if trading contraband light. The blackout no longer felt like a coincidence, it felt coordinated. At the same time, a new kind of official language emerged. Phrases like temporary telemetry interference and localized photometric variability appeared in status bulletins, vague terms used to describe something no one wanted to name. The pattern repeated across organizations: the European Space Agency, JAXA, the Indian Space Research Organization, even smaller observatories. Their wording was so identical it seemed rehearsed. And that sameness created the opposite of calm. It created trust erosion. Outside institutional walls, curiosity began to reorganize itself. Independent scientists, frustrated by the silence, formed a private network, a loose constellation of radio operators, amateur astronomers, and data engineers calling themselves the Aperture. Their goal wasn't protest, it was clarity. They pooled telescope time from around the globe, aligning instruments to capture what official feeds would not. And for the first time in weeks, they succeeded. Their image was imperfect, blurred by distance and light scatter, but it showed enough. Mars appeared dim on the edge of the frame. Near it, barely perceptible, ghost-like, was a shape that seemed to bend the surrounding starlight. It wasn't symmetrical. It wasn't fixed. It seemed to shimmer between forms, like heat above a desert road. Yet, behind that distortion was something solid, something casting shadow. When processed through multiple filters, the image revealed layers, a faint ring surrounding a darker central void. Not a perfect circle, but an ellipse, stretching and contracting slightly from one frame to the next. It was as though space itself had begun to ripple. The Aperture team ran simulations, but none matched what they were seeing. It wasn't plasma. It wasn't debris. It wasn't natural refraction. The only way light could behave like that would be if it passed through a gravitational lens, one small, dense and local, which implied mass, moving mass. Yet Mars's gravitational data didn't show a new body nearby. Whatever it wasn't there in the normal sense. The images spread quietly through encrypted channels and then, inevitably, leaked. Within a day, the story appeared on forums, blogs, and small news pages with headlines like "The Object That Mars Hides" and "ESA Cover-Up, What's Orbiting 3I Atlas?" Most were dismissed immediately as conspiracy theory, but curiosity had already taken root. The more agencies tried to ignore it, the more the world started watching. Citizen astronomers began live-streaming their own telescope feeds, narrating every faint flicker of light. Some even combined footage to simulate full-sky mosaics, filling in the missing regions with older data. It was patchwork science, but it kept the narrative alive. By now, the signal had grown unmistakable. Every major observatory that could access the frequency confirmed the pulse. It wasn't radio noise, and it wasn't solar interference. Its pattern had evolved. The once steady rhythm now fluctuated slightly, as if two overlapping signals had begun to interfere with each other, forming slow, rising waves. When mapped visually, the modulation curve resembled something eerily familiar, a heartbeat. That image alone was enough to capture public imagination. Scientists dismissed the metaphor, but headlines didn't care. 3I Atlas has a pulse became the most searched phrase in astronomy for 3 consecutive days. The agencies tried to respond with reason. Official statements repeated the same refrain: no credible evidence of artificial activity. But credibility had already shifted. The public no longer asked what 3I Atlas was. They asked why no one was telling them what it wasn't. At this stage, you could feel the tone of the global conversation changing. What began as fascination was turning into unease. What started as science had become story, and like every story too large to contain, it began leaking through culture. Music, art, even cinema picked it up. Filmmakers used the pulse as sound design, musicians sampled it as rhythm, painters began depicting the object as a luminous, shifting sphere drifting near a red planet, surrounded by invisible pressure, a visual metaphor for something half real, half imagined. The event was transcending data, it was becoming mythology in real time. And yet, beneath the cultural noise, the science continued. Buried in the data archives of the European Southern Observatory, a small update appeared. Spectral deviation confirmed across all channels. Luminosity increase exceeds model predictions. In simpler terms, 3I Atlas was growing brighter, and not because of reflection. That single line brought quiet dread to those who understood. Brightness without reflection means emission. Emission means energy, and energy in space always has a source. But what kind? No one dared answer. For decades, astronomy has been about watching. Now, for the first time, it feels like something might be watching back. By the time the glow near Mars stabilized, the language of discovery had quietly changed. The words object, visitor, and body were replaced with the neutral term phenomenon. In official reports, that shift was subtle, but to anyone fluent in bureaucratic science, it meant one thing: the event had moved out of public research and into government oversight. NASA stopped releasing tracking data first, then the European Space Agency followed. The Japanese and Indian networks went silent within hours. Instead of open bulletins, communications moved behind internal clearance walls, replaced by review-in-progress placeholders that never updated. Even the most routine telemetry from Mars orbiters began arriving late, delayed by hours, sometimes days. It was as if the data itself now needed permission to exist. No one said the word classified. They didn't need to. In Washington, a joint subcommittee met under the pretext of reviewing planetary observation security. The transcript of that meeting never surfaced, but a short internal memo leaked a week later. It included a single sentence that reshaped the entire discussion. The phenomenon demonstrates dynamic motion inconsistent with gravitational modeling. That phrasing, clinical, precise, deliberately cautious, was the closest thing to an admission that 3I Atlas was still moving, and doing so in ways no one could explain. The following days revealed small but telling shifts. The US Air Force Space Surveillance Network began allocating resources once reserved for satellite tracking. Deep space radar dishes that hadn't been used in years suddenly came online. Civilian radio astronomers trying to observe in the same frequency bands found their access denied. Military priority. Meanwhile, data sharing agreements between agencies quietly expired without renewal. The world's space infrastructure, once a network of cooperation, had fractured into silence. For the first time in decades, scientists found themselves blind to their own sky. And yet, evidence continued leaking in through the cracks. Satellite telemetry used for unrelated research, communications, weather mapping, even GPS diagnostics, began showing interference patterns that correlated with the object's position. The distortions weren't random. They appeared in cycles, timed almost perfectly with that same 73-second pulse. Engineers attempting to filter it out described it as the universe humming under its breath. At the same time, subtle atmospheric effects began appearing on Mars. The thin air, usually calm and static, showed sudden density spikes. Seismographs still operating from the old InSight lander detected low-frequency vibrations. Not quakes, oscillations, repeating, rhythmic. Mars was vibrating in sympathy with something above it. That information never reached the public directly. Instead, governments released a coordinated statement emphasizing that no planetary risk is present and all monitoring continues nominally. But the statement itself raised more questions than it answered. Why coordinate globally to say nothing is happening? Around this time, the object began exhibiting light behavior unlike any previous comet. Instead of growing brighter as it neared the sun, its brightness oscillated, it pulsed, and with each pulse, faint electromagnetic echoes reached the upper layers of Earth's ionosphere, measurable, though barely above the threshold of noise. The signals carried no message, no modulation, but their precision was unnerving. Random processes do not repeat to the millisecond. Independent researchers who shared this finding found their work instantly flooded by counterclaims from anonymous accounts. Pages flagged, posts buried. It became nearly impossible to separate genuine science from digital smoke. Some began to suspect that the silence wasn't just institutional, it was engineered. By now, every government with access to orbital sensors was aware, and none seemed willing to speak. That absence of language left a vacuum, and in that vacuum, speculation took shape. But in a quiet moment, a different kind of document appeared, a technical brief, unsigned, likely leaked from within ESA. It contained coordinates and timestamps, no explanations. Yet one note stood out: vector deviation trending sunward, relative velocity reduction confirmed. That single sentence changed everything. 3I Atlas wasn't passing through, it was slowing down. In celestial mechanics, slowing down is impossible without energy loss. No friction exists in space to cause deceleration. A body that reduces speed must be acted upon by force or generating its own. Within hours, the world's largest radio telescope in China's Guizhou province redirected all observation windows toward Mars. For 3 days, it scanned the region of the object's last known position. On the fourth night, it recorded something no one expected: a momentary broadband flash across multiple frequencies, pure signal, no noise, lasting 1.9 seconds. The pattern repeated exactly 3 times, separated by intervals of 1 minute. Then nothing. Whatever it wasn't natural. But there was no official acknowledgement. Instead, the observatory's logs were quietly replaced by a single entry: data corrupted during atmospheric interference. To the trained eye, that phrasing was too familiar. It had been used before, years ago, when a strange signal known as the WOW signal briefly captivated astronomers before disappearing forever. Now, decades later, history seemed to rhyme. And as governments clamped down, public imagination did the opposite. Online groups began tracking not data, but behavior, observing when and how agencies communicated, how officials chose their words, how small details in press releases hinted at unseen coordination. Patterns emerged, synchronized timing of updates, identical wording between organizations, even shared silence. It was as though the world's institutions had entered orbit themselves, circling a truth they refused to approach directly. Meanwhile, something else began to happen, subtle, almost poetic. In the nights following the first broadband flash, long-exposure photographs from amateur astrophotographers began showing faint filaments stretching outward from Mars's orbit, like fine threads of light drawn through invisible current. They weren't meteors or auroras, and yet they moved, flowing across star fields like strands of silk. Some called it sensor error, some called it art. But the timing matched too perfectly. It was becoming impossible to deny that something extraordinary was unfolding, and that for reasons still unknown, those closest to the truth were retreating into silence. And so the question began to shift. Not what is it, but why won't they tell us? It began with a voice, not an announcement, not a leak, a voice. A faint, trembling recording uploaded anonymously to a private astrophysics server used for peer communication. The speaker never gave a name, but his accent suggested Northern Europe. His first words were measured, almost rehearsed. The models don't hold. If this continues, Mars won't be stable. No context, no data, just that. The clip lasted less than a minute, and yet, within hours, it spread like a low whisper through encrypted channels. Those who heard it recognized something rare, not panic, but fatigue, the kind that comes from watching data that refuses to make sense. And then, one by one, other voices followed. A radio technician in Chile who noticed that transmissions once reflecting off Mars's ionosphere now returned milliseconds earlier than they should, implying a shorter path as though something massive was refracting the signals. A spectral analyst in Madrid who observed frequency interference patterns that pulsed exactly when Mars passed behind the Sun. A geometric impossibility unless something between the planets was re-emitting energy, and an astrophotographer in Canada who claimed she had captured faint arcs of colour around Mars, not lens flare, but diffraction, as though light itself was bending differently. They didn't claim discovery, they shared confusion. That was the moment the Rogue framework began, a collective of mid-level scientists who refused to let the silence swallow their work. They weren't radical, they were careful, people who had built their reputations on precision and patience. But when data stopped matching reality, they chose the latter. They began sharing raw telemetry under the radar, masking their metadata behind educational servers, publishing analyses under pseudonyms. To outsiders, their work looked like harmless independent research. But behind every chart, every file, there was a quiet defiance. If they won't tell the world, we will. At first, what they found seemed impossible. The trajectory data from Mars orbiters didn't show a consistent path for 3I Atlas. Instead, it showed drift, tiny shifts in motion that alternated in direction, as if something was adjusting its vector intentionally. The movements weren't random. They followed a pattern, small bursts of acceleration, followed by equal deceleration, almost like course correction. Then came the realization that made them stop. The bursts didn't originate from the object itself, but from points near it, smaller emissions, invisible on standard imaging, but detectable in thermal variance maps. It was as if something else was traveling with 3I Atlas, faint and coordinated. For the first time, the question changed from what is it to how many are there. They built simulations, overlapping trajectories, estimating positions. The result made no sense under classical physics. 3, maybe 4 smaller bodies, moving as if tethered by invisible constraints, maintaining precise spacing. The data looked artificial, but the scientists refused to say it aloud. To name it was to end their careers. Meanwhile, public curiosity was shifting from rumour to fixation. Sleep podcasts, late-night news panels, and documentaries began discussing 3I Atlas in poetic tones, not as an object, but as a presence. Viewers described dreams of faint red skies, rhythmic vibrations, a sense that something was calling from beyond Mars. It was irrational. It was human. The Rogue framework tried to stay objective, but something about the data unnerved even them. Each time the signal repeated, its harmonic complexity deepened. The waveform wasn't constant anymore. It had modulation, faint, organized frequencies layered atop the pulse. To the untrained ear, it sounded like static. But when mapped spectrally, the intervals formed symmetrical spacing, too regular to be random. It wasn't communication, not yet, but it wasn't noise either. They cross-referenced it with past astronomical phenomena, pulsars, quasars, even magnetar echoes. Nothing matched. The pattern wasn't cosmic background or instrument feedback. It was deliberate periodicity. Within days, their internal discussions turned philosophical. One message, written by a senior physicist, read simply, "It's as if the universe is blinking at us." But the group wasn't invisible. After 2 weeks of exchanging data, members began reporting login lockouts. Some found their institutional emails deactivated. One member in Italy received an unmarked envelope containing a printout of her own unpublished dataset, with a single handwritten line, "You should stop now." That was when they understood the blackout wasn't passive, it was enforcement. Still, a few persisted. They began using old methods: analog radios, printed papers, handwritten graphs scanned through private channels. In an era of digital surveillance, they went backward, and in that retreat found freedom. Their persistence paid off. On the 10th day of coordinated observation, they captured something extraordinary, a faint shift in 3I Atlas's spectral emission that matched a narrow frequency band long used in deep space communication, the hydrogen line. Every astrophysicist knows its significance, the one universal frequency chosen by SETI decades ago as the most logical channel for extraterrestrial contact. The emission lasted only seconds. It wasn't complex, it wasn't coded, but it was there, a single spike of hydrogen line activity perfectly aligned with one of the pulse cycles. That night, the lead astronomer of the group wrote in his notebook, "It's listening." No one knows what he meant by that. Some think he was referring to the echo effect observed in later data, signals bouncing back not from Mars, but from something near it. Others believe he meant something deeper, that 3I Atlas wasn't transmitting, but responding, and then, one by one, the members of the rogue framework vanished from public view. Some deleted their accounts voluntarily, others had them wiped, a few transferred to private research contracts. Their names appeared months later in obscure conference proceedings, attached to unrelated studies about ionospheric refraction noise. The same phrase, the same silence, but their legacy remained, a folder uploaded to an encrypted archive, containing terabytes of raw observation data labeled only reflection. The last file timestamp matched the exact moment Mars entered solar conjunction, disappearing behind the Sun from Earth's line of sight. After that, nothing. It was as though the universe itself had reached forward, gently pressed mute, and waited for us to listen harder. When Mars slipped behind the Sun, the world entered an unusual kind of night. For 40 days, no direct line of sight existed between Earth and the red planet. Solar interference blocked radio transmissions, optical imaging was impossible, and every spacecraft orbiting Mars fell silent. It was a predictable, routine event. Astronomers call it solar conjunction, but this time it felt different, because this time something else was back there with it. The official tone was calm, almost rehearsed. Agencies reminded the public that conjunctions happen every 2 years, that it was normal for communications to pause, that there was no cause for concern. Yet the phrasing carried that same evasive precision the world had come to recognize. Careful language designed to say nothing at all. In labs and observatories, the absence of data became its own kind of data. Instruments that normally picked up background solar radiation began detecting subtle oscillations, fluctuations far too organized to be solar static. Every 24 minutes, a faint deviation swept through the lower radio bands, a small drop followed by a sharp rise. It wasn't strong enough to trigger alerts, but it repeated exactly, down to the decimal second. It was as if something behind the Sun was echoing the rhythm of a clock that didn't belong to us. The timing wasn't lost on anyone who remembered the 73-second pulse. Multiples of that interval lined up almost perfectly with the new modulation. Coincidence, perhaps, but in astrophysics, coincidence is a word used when mathematics feels uncomfortable. During those long weeks of enforced silence, attention shifted inward, from space to the people who study it. Conferences postponed, research groups disbanded. The global astronomical community, normally vibrant and open, began to resemble an organism retreating into hibernation. Even university observatories received new, temporary restrictions on data sharing. The reasoning? Calibration consistency. No one bought it. And yet, in that collective stillness, a strange mood took hold, an almost sacred quiet. For the first time in months, there were no new updates, no new theories, no public drama, just night after night of waiting. Scientists who had spent years chasing signals now found themselves listening to nothing, and that nothing had a weight to it, like a paused breath before something vast exhales. Then, on the 17th day, the first anomaly appeared. A small radio telescope in South Africa, normally used for pulsar mapping, picked up a signal that didn't fit any known pattern, not solar, not cosmic background. A single narrowband pulse at precisely 1,420 MHz, the hydrogen line again. The operator, thinking it was noise, logged it and forgot. When the next sweep came 15 minutes later, the pulse returned. Identical frequency, identical duration, but this time slightly stronger. The observatory filed a routine interference report. Within an hour, the record disappeared from the public database. It was easy to dismiss, until it happened again, in Chile, in Australia, in Italy, the same signal, the same timing, different hemispheres, same result. It was triangulated to a region exactly where Mars would have been if the Sun weren't between us. Someone or something was transmitting through the Sun. The implications were staggering. No known natural phenomenon can maintain coherence through the solar plasma. The energy required to pierce that interference barrier would dwarf the output of any human technology. And yet, here it was, faint, consistent, impossible. Governments didn't respond. They couldn't. To acknowledge it was to admit a loss of control over information itself, so they stayed quiet. The public, unaware of the specifics, simply felt the tension, a global unease expressed through art, conversation, insomnia. The world began dreaming in red and gold. For the scientists who still cared to look, the only option was patience. They waited for conjunction to end, counting the days until Mars would emerge from behind the Sun's glare. Every calculation, every model was prepared in advance. If the object reappeared, they would know exactly where to point their instruments. And then, on the morning of the 41st day, the Sun released a coronal mass ejection, a violent burst of plasma sweeping across the inner solar system. It wasn't unusual, but its timing felt cruel. The storm severed communications with several probes and wiped clean days of recorded telemetry. When the static cleared, Mars returned, faint, red, and quiet. No pulse, no signal, no glow. It was as though both the planet and 3I Atlas had exhaled and gone still. The first images came from a European orbiter, low resolution, half corrupted, but visible enough to identify terrain. There was no sign of debris, no new craters, no atmospheric plumes. Everything looked normal, too normal. But buried deep in the metadata of those images was something that normal algorithms ignored: a repeating checksum error. Each frame contained a numerical discrepancy, a single digit fluctuating between two values. Engineers first blamed compression, but when the pattern was graphed, it formed a waveform, and when that waveform was converted to audio, it produced a tone, a simple, low hum, constant, steady, and eerily similar to the last frequency detected before the blackout. It was as if the images themselves carried a residue of the signal. When word reached the remnants of the rogue framework, they did what they always did: cross-reference, verify, test. The checksum wasn't random. It appeared at exact pixel intervals that matched known topographical features near Mars's equator. Features that, when plotted on a sphere, formed an alignment pointing directly toward 3I Atlas's last recorded vector. Not a message, perhaps, but not coincidence either. No one could explain how a numerical compression error could mimic a harmonic frequency. No one could explain why it appeared only in frames captured during the first hour after conjunction ended. And yet, the more it was studied, the more deliberate it seemed. The conclusion whispered across encrypted calls wasn't that Mars had changed, but that the light returning from Mars had been altered, as though space itself had carried the memory of what passed behind the Sun, and that idea that the universe could remember was somehow more unsettling than any signal. As the scientific world debated in silence, one final transmission arrived, unnoticed by the public. A deep space relay station in Argentina logged a faint ping, too weak for ordinary detection. It matched no orbital pattern, came from no known probe, and lasted less than half a second. But when analysts plotted its trajectory, the source wasn't Mars. It was between Mars and Earth, drifting slowly inward. At first, the reappearance came as a whisper. a faint return of telemetry, fragmented, stuttering through the static. Mars was visible again, but what came with it wasn't just light. The signals carried fluctuations no algorithm could stabilize. Every attempt to clean the data only deepened the distortions, as though the information itself resisted clarity. In the first official release, ESA described it as post-conjunction imaging artifacts. That was the phrase. Simple, sterile, forgettable. But to anyone who had ever processed raw space data, those words carried a different meaning. Artifacts don't appear with pattern, artifacts don't repeat with mathematical precision, yet these did. Each new frame from Mars showed thin, translucent lines stretching diagonally across the image, each one perfectly parallel, each flickering at the same interval, precisely 73 seconds apart. The same rhythm, the same pulse that had haunted researchers for months. Only this time, it wasn't a radio signal. It was embedded in light. When converted into time-lapse sequences, the lines appeared to move, bending, weaving, coiling around the image like magnetic filaments caught in slow motion. Analysts tried to remove them, applying every filter known to modern optics. But the more they erased, the stronger the remaining traces became, as if the interference adapted. Some suggested it was a software bug, a digital ghost introduced by compression or solar radiation. But one engineer noticed something everyone else missed. The filaments didn't overlay the images, they interacted with them. Terrain under the lines appeared subtly darker, as though shadowed. It meant whatever caused them wasn't a camera glitch, it was real, and it wasn't just Mars. Across independent observatories, telescopes trained on the region began reporting inconsistent refraction patterns. Stars near Mars seemed to wobble, their positions shifting microscopically every few minutes, then stabilizing again. Light itself, the most constant thing in the universe, was behaving as if space were rippling. When data from Chile, Spain, and Japan were overlaid, the same distortion emerged, forming a faint, circular pattern, not centered on Mars, but ahead of it. Something unseen was bending light in real time. The first models came out days later. According to preliminary analysis, whatever was causing the distortions wasn't small. Its estimated diameter, between 60 and 80 kilometers. That's not debris, that's structure. But the word structure never appeared in any official document. Agencies used phrases like density anomaly or gravitational interference. Still, the implications were impossible to disguise. If this was gravitational, it meant mass, a tremendous amount of it. If it wasn't, then something else was manipulating spacetime itself. The world didn't know any of this yet. Publicly, agencies framed the event as a successful post-conjunction calibration. Headlines reassured readers that everything was nominal. But behind closed doors, private networks buzzed with urgency. The rogue framework's surviving members had begun reassembling quietly under new aliases, using fragments of the leaked checksum data as reference points. When they plotted the distortion pattern, a chilling alignment emerged. It matched the vector of 3I Atlas's trajectory, perfectly. Whatever had emerged inside Mars's orbit wasn't random. It was the same object, or something it left behind. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory ran the numbers again, using trajectory data from before the blackout. The math didn't work. If 3I Atlas had maintained its previous velocity, it should have been halfway to the asteroid belt by now. Instead, it was slowing down, again, and moving inward. The deceleration wasn't gradual either. It followed a curve consistent with active thrust. That term alone, active, sent shivers through every analyst who dared whisper it, because no natural process can produce sustained thrust without mass ejection, and none was detected. Then came the infrared readings. A newly deployed satellite captured a faint heat signature extending tens of kilometers around the anomaly. It wasn't uniform like a comet's coma. It was structured, segmented. When enhanced, the pattern resembled concentric rings radiating outward from a central point. It was a design, not a cloud. No one dared publish the image. The data circulated privately among scientists who understood what they were seeing but couldn't afford to believe it. A structure of that scale, positioned precisely along an orbital path, decelerating with measurable control. It wasn't an asteroid. It wasn't a comet. It was something behaving with intent. and still the official channels held their silence. The public only noticed the sky. Night after night, the same region near Mars glowed faintly, visible even through light pollution. Amateur astronomers described it as a slow-moving star that breathes. Photographs showed subtle gradients of color, deep reds fading into electric blue, as if the light were shifting through unknown spectrums. When time-lapse images were analyzed, that color shift wasn't random either. It cycled through wavelengths corresponding to known atomic emissions, hydrogen, helium, oxygen, repeating in precise ratios. It was as though the object were replaying the language of the elements themselves, a kind of cosmic signature. Theories spread quickly. Some suggested a self-regulating plasma field. Others proposed dark matter interaction. A few, speaking quietly, whispered something far less comfortable: artificial modulation. Meanwhile, governments began preparing unrelated contingency exercises. Satellite networks ran emergency synchronization drills. Civil agencies rehearsed blackout scenarios in case of solar interference. Observatories were instructed to reassign optical arrays. Everything looked procedural, yet everything aligned perfectly with the anomaly's reappearance. It was coordination without acknowledgement. Then, one night, a burst of light cut through the silence. A single flash, visible from both hemispheres, bright enough to trigger atmospheric sensors, but too brief for classification. Every instrument pointed toward Mars registered a spike in X-rays, gamma, even low-frequency radio. The pulse lasted exactly 73 seconds. It was the same number, the same rhythm. Only this time, the pulse wasn't faint. It was strong enough to saturate detectors across the planet, producing identical interference patterns from Chile to Australia to Greenland. The pattern carried structure. Inside the waveform, analysts detected harmonics, sub-frequencies arranged in a mathematical sequence identical to the Fibonacci ratio. Nature's architecture embedded in light. By dawn, power grids in several countries experienced brief synchronization errors. Satellites rebooted, communications lagged. Nothing catastrophic, just a subtle reminder that the pulse had brushed across Earth's electromagnetic field like a fingertip tracing glass. And when it passed, everything was still. Mars hung quiet again, the faint halo gone. Agencies resumed their nominal operations, releasing no explanation for the anomaly. But for those who watched, it was impossible to unsee what had happened. The universe had spoken, not in words, but in ratios, and something, somewhere, had answered. The silence that followed was deeper than before, not the silence of distance, but of recognition, because by then it was no longer a question of what 3I Atlas was. It was a question of why it slowed down, and if it was slowing, what exactly was it waiting for? The data, once fragmented and uncertain, began to coalesce into something solid, not through official channels, but through the persistence of those who refused to stop looking. Across continents, a silent network of astronomers compared readings, refining noise into pattern. What they found, when aligned, formed the first complete thermal map of 3I Atlas since the blackout. It didn't look like a comet. It didn't look like an asteroid either. The shape was wrong. Instead of a sphere or an irregular rock, the heat distribution outlined a geometry no natural body could sustain. A flattened oval with a dense, symmetrical ridge around its center. The ridge emitted periodic heat signatures like pulses of controlled energy radiating outward. Some sections were colder than the vacuum around them, as if something within was absorbing radiation. The thermal symmetry was near perfect. Nature doesn't do symmetry like that. When the image was processed further, a faint lattice pattern appeared along one edge, small, rectangular intervals repeating with mechanical precision. That detail alone split the scientific community in two. Half argued it was an artifact of interpolation, the other half stayed quiet. Silence, after all, can say more than debate. The rogue framework saw it differently. They knew the history of 3I Atlas, how every encounter with data seemed to leave a fingerprint of intelligence hidden beneath noise. And now, as the structure began to reveal itself, that sense of design was impossible to ignore. When they overlaid the thermal map with earlier light interference data, a perfect alignment emerged. The lattice lines matched the refraction arcs seen before conjunction, meaning the distortion wasn't atmospheric, but physical. Something on the surface was bending light intentionally. The question shifted again. No longer, what is it doing here? But what is it built from? Spectrographic readings gave few answers. The material reflected almost nothing across the visible spectrum, absorbing wavelengths instead of scattering them. Infrared sensors detected near-zero emissivity. It wasn't rock, ice, or metal as we know it. Whatever this thing was made of, it didn't behave like matter. And then came the most haunting discovery. When an independent astrophysics lab in Switzerland ran the new readings through pattern recognition software, the algorithm flagged a recurring ratio in the lattice spacing, one that matched the very same Fibonacci progression found in the pulse's harmonics weeks earlier. Light, heat, and geometry, all singing the same mathematical tune. No one dared publish that. Not because it was wrong, but because it was too right. The precision was suffocating. It implied design, intent, a purpose woven through every level of observation. The world, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware. Official statements still described expected variability, as though humanity hadn't just stumbled upon a structure that rewrote its understanding of physics. The public stared at faint lights in the night sky, unaware that each flicker carried the echo of order beyond comprehension. Inside closed labs, meetings turned philosophical. Some scientists argued that what they were seeing could be a kind of natural construct, a gravitational crystal formed through unknown cosmic processes. Others, whispering in corners, wondered if this was evidence of something manufactured on a scale humanity had never imagined. If 3I Atlas wasn't just an object, could it be a vessel? The idea sounded impossible, yet every new fragment of data whispered in that direction. The deceleration, the repeating pulse, the structure that maintained impossible symmetry, all of it suggested control, something capable of resisting the sun's pull, capable of hiding within it. But if it was a vessel, who or what commanded it? No radar had detected transmission back toward any point in space. No radio emissions, no response to encoded pings, no measurable energy signatures suggesting life. It was silent, so perfectly silent that even the noise of its silence felt deliberate. Then came a discovery that fractured even the rogue framework's composure. Buried deep in archival telemetry from before the blackout, one researcher found a faint correlation, a micro-oscillation in the signal delay between two Mars orbiters. The variation was minute, barely measurable, but consistent. It wasn't random interference, it was timed, and when the delay pattern was translated into binary, it produced a repeating series of numbers, 2 digits, over and over again. 6, 1. No one knew what it meant. The numbers could have been anything. A coincidence, an instrument quirk, a checksum anomaly. But one of the framework's oldest members, a historian of science, recognized the sequence immediately. 61, the atomic number of promethium, a rare element that doesn't exist naturally on Earth in stable form, a product of decay, impossible to preserve without artificial containment. If that reference was intentional, then whoever, or whatever, had embedded it understood human atomic notation. It understood communication. The discovery wasn't public. It wasn't even written down in official notes. It spread quietly, word to word, voice to voice. A few of the team wanted to broadcast it, to send a wideband transmission at frequency 1420 MHz, the same hydrogen line they believed had been used before. Others argued silence was safer. The vote never happened. That same night, all of the framework's private servers went offline. No breach alerts, no malware traces, just a clean, simultaneous shutdown. When they rebooted hours later, the folders were intact, except for one, the file labeled Reflection, gone. At the same time, observatories tracking 3I Atlas noticed another anomaly. The object's heat map changed again, this time rapidly. The symmetrical bands flared bright, then dimmed, alternating like rotating beacons. The spacing between each pulse wasn't random. When plotted on a timeline, it mirrored the orbital period of Mars. It was as if the object was synchronizing with the planet. Within 24 hours, global agencies quietly halted all civilian telescope access to the region. Observation licenses were temporarily suspended for recalibration, but amateur astronomers kept watching. They noticed something else. Faint lines of light moving between Mars and the object. Not jets, not debris, but slow, shimmering bridges of illumination, almost invisible to the naked eye, detectable only through long exposure. It looked like connection, and somewhere in that connection, buried deep within interference and noise, came a sound, not through speakers or data lines, but through vibration, resonant frequencies recorded by seismic instruments across multiple continents. A hum, rising from the noise floor of the Earth itself. It lasted 73 seconds. The same number again, the same rhythm. This time, it wasn't coming from Mars. It was coming from below us. At first, the hum was nothing more than a tremor in data, a background anomaly easily dismissed as atmospheric resonance or seismic coincidence. Instruments registered it as a low-frequency vibration just below the threshold of human hearing, oscillating at 19.7 Hz. Too deep to hear, but powerful enough to measure. It wasn't local. The pattern appeared in Chile, in Greenland, in Hawaii, even beneath the Australian desert. Every sensor that recorded natural background resonance showed the same rise and fall, the same 73-second cycle, the same number. No one made the connection at first. Data analysts assumed a software bug, a misplaced filter, but when they synchronized their recordings against solar activity, the hum didn't align with the sun or the moon or even Earth's rotation, it aligned with Mars. Every time 3I Atlas passed over the Martian equator, the hum grew fractionally stronger on Earth. Some called it coincidence, others stopped calling it anything at all. The first to notice the physical effects were not scientists, but ordinary people. Reports emerged of sleepless nights, of vibrations felt in solid floors, of animals reacting to something no one could hear. Across rural regions, strange interference crept into AM radio bands, faint modulations that pulsed like a heartbeat through static. Engineers who tried to trace the signal found it everywhere and nowhere at once. The pattern wasn't transmitting, it was resonating, and resonance, as physicists know, is not communication, it's connection. When NASA's Deep Space Network picked up similar oscillations in its ground-based antennas, a quiet panic took hold. It wasn't that the data made no sense, it was that it made too much sense. The resonance frequency matched the Earth's natural Schumann band, the electromagnetic envelope that connects the planet's atmosphere to its surface. In other words, the hum wasn't entering Earth, it was synchronizing with it. The conclusion was unspoken but inescapable. Whatever 3I Atlas had done near Mars, the effect wasn't contained there anymore. Something about the structure, the way it bent light, emitted harmonic pulses, or simply existed, was now interacting with the fundamental frequency of our planet. And just like that, the story stopped being about observation. It became personal. For the first time in living memory, humanity wasn't just watching space. Space was answering back. Officially, there was nothing unusual. Press briefings framed the tremors as instrument drift. But deep in research facilities, seismic labs were receiving quiet directives to filter out all sub-20 Hz data, the justification, redundant noise. In practice, it meant no one outside a handful of clearance groups could study the hum at all. That silence broke only once. A retired geophysicist in Finland, unaware of the new restrictions, published a short paper online comparing the hum's phase variations to Martian orbital motion. It was a simple correlation chart, but what it showed was extraordinary. The oscillation wasn't just synchronous with Mars, it was slightly ahead of it. That meant the resonance was predictive. The hum was not echoing planetary movement, it was anticipating it. His paper disappeared within hours. His accounts were deleted the same night, but copies spread through encrypted groups. The rogue framework, scattered but alive, confirmed the finding. The frequency variations predicted Mars's orbital wobble up to 21 minutes before it occurred. That kind of precision implied direct linkage, as if both worlds were connected through some unknown medium. If that were true, the implications were staggering. It meant the object, 3I Atlas, had found a way to bind two planetary systems through resonance. Not a communication signal in the classical sense, but a synchronization, an invisible bridge linking vibrational states across millions of kilometers. And the timing couldn't have been more unnerving. Around the same period, strange luminosities began to appear near Earth's magnetosphere. Diffuse auroral formations not linked to solar activity. They shimmered across the poles with unusual colors: violet, silver, deep crimson. The patterns were rhythmic, almost musical, flickering in perfect 73-second intervals. For the first time in recorded history, the aurora borealis had a pulse. Photographs from Alaska, Norway, and northern Canada captured the phenomenon. At first glance, it looked like a normal aurora, until time-lapse imaging revealed something uncanny. The lights weren't expanding outward as auroras do, they were contracting inward, converging toward a central point above the pole, as if Earth's own magnetic field was listening. And beneath that glowing canopy, instruments continued to hum. The connection between the polar lights and 3I Atlas was never made public, but insiders knew. Every auroral pulse matched the timing of the Martian resonance. As the object circled closer to the sun, the strength of the synchronization grew. It was as though both worlds were now part of a single resonant system, sharing information not through light or sound, but through space itself. The implications extended beyond science. Pilots began reporting compass drift at high altitudes, submarines experienced intermittent sonar echo mismatches, even atomic clocks, the foundation of modern precision, recorded nanosecond fluctuations that defied correction. Reality itself seemed to be breathing, subtly stretching and contracting in rhythm with a pulse that shouldn't exist, and through it all, the agencies remained silent. Public communications grew shorter, more mechanical. Updates were phrased in language designed to soothe, not inform. All systems nominal, solar interference within expected range. No deviations from trajectory detected, but those who worked behind those statements knew better. The deviations weren't gone, they had simply become the new normal. One internal memo, leaked from a European facility, contained a single chilling line. Stabilization may be adaptive. No one could agree on what that meant. Some believed it implied the object was compensating for something, adjusting its behavior in response to environmental change. Others feared it meant Earth itself was now part of that adjustment. And then, just as quietly as it had started, the hum faded, sensors went silent, the auroras dissipated, the skies cleared, the world exhaled, mistaking quiet for safety. But within that silence, buried beneath the noise floor, one final signal persisted. Faint, almost imperceptible, hidden in the spectral edge of background radiation. It wasn't a tone this time, but a pattern, a series of pulses forming the same mathematical sequence found in the Fibonacci curve, scaled down to the atomic level. It wasn't random, it wasn't interference, it was a signature. And when that pattern was overlaid with planetary coordinates, the result was unmistakable. It didn't point to Mars, it didn't point to 3I Atlas, it pointed to Earth's moon. The silence after the hum should have brought relief. For a few short days, the world seemed to return to its predictable rhythm. The skies still, the readings flat, the instruments finally quiet. But scientists who had listened closely to the resonance knew silence rarely means nothing. In nature, silence is often transition, a pause before the next note. 3 nights later, that note arrived. It came not from Mars, but from the moon. At first, the detection was so faint it nearly went unnoticed. A deep space radar array in Western Australia picked up a delayed echo during a routine lunar scan. The signal was expected to bounce off the moon's surface and return in 256 seconds, the standard light time delay, but this time it came back twice. The first reflection was normal. The second arrived 1.3 seconds later, weaker but structured, as if it had passed through something before returning. The engineers repeated the test. The anomaly repeated too. Independent confirmation came hours later from a facility in Spain. The same double reflection, the same delay, the same precision down to the microsecond. No known geological feature on the moon could cause such a clean temporal echo. It wasn't scattering, it was reflection, from something smooth, something metallic. NASA quietly acknowledged the anomaly, but offered no public comment. Internally, however, a message was circulated across multiple agencies under the heading Lunar Reflectivity Variance, Priority 1. The attached data showed something unsettling. The echo originated not from the near side, but from a location just beyond the terminator, the line that divides lunar day and night, the dark side. It was an area long mapped by orbiters but rarely studied in active scans. No signals were expected there. No infrastructure existed there, yet the reflection had returned not once, but continuously, rhythmic, repeating every 73 seconds, the number again. When astronomers overlaid the coordinates of the anomaly with lunar topography, they discovered it corresponded to a crater region known as Herzsprung Basin, a colossal ancient scar nearly 600 kilometers across. The site had always been geologically quiet, filled with fine dust and impact debris. But now, thermal scans revealed localized heat fluctuations deep within its shadow. Something under the surface was warming. The readings were modest, a few degrees above baseline, but the pattern was precise, circular, expanding outward like ripples on a frozen sea. It wasn't geothermal. The moon has no active core. Whatever was heating that crater was doing so from above, or from within. Within hours, every major space agency redirected its lunar probes toward the area. The Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, India's Chandrayaan array, even old Chinese relay satellites were quietly repositioned. None of them would release public images. The official explanation cited instrument calibration. But internal data logs leaked to the rogue framework told a different story. Each orbiter had detected faint electromagnetic fluctuations near the Hertzsprung basin, the same 19.7 Hz resonance once heard on Earth. The frequency was weaker, thinner, almost like an echo of the original hum, but its phase alignment matched perfectly with 3I Atlas's trajectory. That meant one of two things: either the object near Mars was now projecting resonance toward the Moon, or something on the Moon was responding to it. The implications were unthinkable. Somewhere beneath the lunar dust, a mechanism, dormant, ancient, or newly awakened, had begun to stir. Its timing, its pattern, and its synchronization with the interstellar object were too exact to ignore. And then came the image. Only one frame leaked before it was buried under classification. It showed the basin from a high oblique angle, mostly shadow, grainy and indistinct. But near the crater's center, faint glints of light formed a perfect hexagonal pattern. 6 points connected by dim arcs, glowing faintly through the dust, like submerged glass catching sunlight from beneath. The spacing between the lights, when measured, wasn't random. It corresponded exactly to the lattice spacing of 3I Atlas's thermal geometry, down to the meter. Whatever was under Hertzsprung Basin was not separate from the object near Mars. It was part of it. Perhaps older, perhaps waiting. For the first time, agencies began coordinating across continents. The European Space Agency, NASA and JAXA, established a private data corridor, sharing readings under a new code name, Project EchoFrame. Its mission: determine whether the resonance detected between Earth and Mars had now extended to the Moon. The results were inconclusive, not because the data wasn't there, but because it was too consistent. The frequency was no longer fluctuating, it was stable. The resonance had stopped being a pulse, it had become a tone, a sustained continuous vibration linking 3 celestial bodies, Earth, Mars, and the Moon. By all known physics, that should be impossible. Space doesn't transmit sound. Electromagnetic resonance doesn't bridge planetary distances without energy loss. But the measurements showed coherence across millions of kilometers. Some researchers began referring to it quietly as a field. If true, it would mean 3I Atlas had created or awakened a standing wave, a harmonic network spanning the inner solar system, a kind of invisible architecture not built of matter but of energy and geometry. But there was another interpretation, darker, older, harder to dismiss. A few physicists revisited an obscure NASA paper from the late 1970s that mentioned transient seismic echoes during the Apollo missions. Back then, astronauts had placed seismometers on the lunar surface. When spent rocket stages impacted the Moon, the vibrations had echoed for hours, so long that one scientist famously said, "The Moon rang like a bell." At the time, it was explained as a property of dry regolith and fractured rock, but now, re-examined under the lens of 3I Atlas's resonance, those echoes looked less geological and more structural. If the Moon had once rung like a bell, perhaps it was because something inside it was built to ring. And now, after decades of silence, it was ringing again, faintly, rhythmically, in harmony with an object not of this system. By dawn, deep space arrays around the world detected the same faint signal emanating from the Moon's far side. It wasn't a reflection anymore, it was transmission, and hidden within its narrow frequency band, encoded deep in the modulation, analysts detected a mathematical structure so elegant it chilled even the most skeptical minds. It was the Fibonacci ratio again, but this time inverted. Where 3I Atlas's pulse had expanded outward, the lunar signal contracted inward, mirroring it perfectly. Two signals, one projecting, one receiving, forming a balanced equation across space. A bridge had been completed, but if the object near Mars was sending and the Moon was responding, then what, exactly, was Earth's role between them? By the time official agencies acknowledged the lunar signal, the data had already escaped their control. It spread quietly, a leak without malice, passed hand to hand between independent astronomers who refused to let the truth dissolve in bureaucracy. Within hours, encrypted spectrograms appeared on private astrophysics servers, showing a narrow band of repeating frequencies that shouldn't exist in nature. What made it undeniable wasn't the pattern itself, but its stability. No known geological, electromagnetic, or solar process could maintain such precision for that long. The signal had coherence, as if it was being tuned, maintained, or balanced by something intelligent. Soon, amateur astronomers began to notice strange distortions in their own data. Libration maps of the Moon's surface showed tiny shifts, micro-movements across the dark side terrain, measurable only in pixels but persistent across multiple nights. The Hertzsprung basin was changing shape. Its shadow line deepened, the rim seemed sharper, and the temperature gradients no longer matched expectations. Something beneath the dust was moving. NASA and ESA denied it, but satellite telemetry told a different story. Lunar orbiters, especially those near the Terminator line, began to experience unexplainable attitude adjustments, tiny course deviations requiring no fuel corrections. It was as if a weak external force was gently nudging them, guiding their flight paths. Engineers called it a micro-thrust anomaly. Privately, they used another term, drift assist. When plotted on orbital maps, the deviations formed a strange geometry, not random but aligned. Each satellite's drift pointed toward the same coordinates, the center of Hertzsprung basin. At first, it was just math. Then came the image. Captured by a low-orbit thermal imager, it wasn't supposed to exist. The shot showed the crater floor glowing faintly with concentric rings of warmth, expanding outward like ripples in stone. The pattern pulsed every 73 seconds, the same period that once defined the hum, the aurora, and 3I Atlas's modulation. But there was something new. At the heart of those rings, right at the center of Hertzsprung basin, stood a vertical formation, thin, uniform, precisely 80 meters tall. It cast no thermal shadow and reflected almost no visible light. It shouldn't have been there, and yet it was. For lack of a better term, scientists began calling it the spire. Its surface was darker than any known material. Radar couldn't penetrate it. Infrared sensors showed a complete absence of emission. It absorbed every wavelength aimed at it like a hole in light itself. When news of the image reached higher levels of government, the response was immediate and absolute. All lunar communication frequencies were reclassified. Independent observation rights were revoked. Every public-facing dataset from the Moon was temporarily suspended pending recalibration. But it was too late. The image had already leaked. By dawn, it was everywhere. Across forums, news feeds, and social platforms, a single grainy photo began circulating, a tall, slender column rising from the Moon's shadow, surrounded by faint concentric glow. The world had seen too much to unsee it. Official spokespeople called it a compression artifact, a glitch in low-light imaging. But the explanations lacked conviction. Even in their denials, there was hesitation. The human voice knows when it's hearing someone choose their words carefully, and the people noticed. For the first time in decades, global interest in space surged beyond curiosity. Millions watched live streams from backyard telescopes. Old observatories reopened. Satellite tracking apps crashed from traffic. It felt less like a coordinated observation and more like a collective instinct, a need to witness something real before it was hidden again. In that restless collective gaze, something remarkable happened. A group of independent astronomers in Argentina, using synchronized high-aperture lenses, captured a faint shimmer above the lunar surface, a distortion, barely visible, resembling atmospheric lensing. But the Moon has no atmosphere. What they recorded wasn't refraction, it was motion. The shimmer rose vertically, hovered, and then descended again into the shadowed crater. The whole sequence lasted less than 5 seconds. Frame-by-frame analysis revealed a shape, not sharp but symmetrical, moving with an unnatural steadiness. It wasn't debris, nor light reflection. It was structured, deliberate, and it disappeared precisely as the 73-second pulse began. The timing was exact. Within hours, the rogue framework cross-referenced the footage with data from radio telescopes still tracking 3I Atlas. The pulse from Mars' vicinity intensified by a fractional amount at the same instant the shimmer vanished into the Moon's crater. The synchronization was flawless. One pulse sent, one pulse received. And then, for the first time in months, the object near Mars changed its behavior. It began to accelerate. The change was gradual, so slow it took days to confirm, but unmistakable. Its relative velocity shifted from stable orbit to a slow inward spiral, not toward the Sun, but toward Earth's orbit. It wasn't random drift, it was navigation. Calculations predicted that, if the acceleration continued at the same rate, the object would pass near the Moon in less than 6 weeks, and if that happened, Earth's natural satellite would no longer be the passive observer it once was. It had already become part of the system. Behind closed doors, the mood turned from curiosity to quiet alarm. No one wanted to say it aloud, but the implication was unavoidable. If the Moon was now active, if its spire was reacting to something beyond Mars, then humanity was no longer a spectator in this story, it was a participant, and participation carries consequence. As the data poured in, another layer of the puzzle emerged. The signal from Hertzsprung Basin began to change. Its harmonic signature split into two frequencies, one steady, one modulated. When analyzed mathematically, the modulated layer translated into a binary pattern, and that pattern, when decoded through a simple substitution cipher, revealed something impossible. It was language, not human, not recognizable, but structured, repeating, recursive, following rules of syntax and pattern density consistent with communication. It wasn't a beacon anymore, it was conversation. And somewhere between the Moon and 3I Atlas, that conversation was happening in real time. Across the world, observatories strained to listen. Supercomputers parsed the incoming data. AI models ran billions of simulations trying to find meaning in the signal, translating numbers into tones, tones into rhythm, rhythm into form. But none of them could explain the feeling that came when the waveform was finally played aloud. It wasn't noise, it wasn't chaos. It sounded almost human, not words, not speech, but a cadence, rising, falling, pausing, as if the signal itself was breathing. Somewhere out there, something was alive, or perhaps it was trying to wake something that once was. And if that was true, the Moon was no longer a relic. It was a receiver, a listening post, and the message wasn't meant for space, it was meant for us. When the signal first changed direction, no one noticed. For days, data centers continued logging frequency bands automatically, unaware that what had been incoming was now outgoing. It wasn't until a graduate student at the Jodrell Bank Observatory ran a reverse phase analysis that the discovery was made. The Moon was transmitting. The change was subtle, but undeniable. The waveform that once echoed the pulse of 3I Atlas now carried a forward bias, an energy displacement moving away from the lunar surface. Something beneath the regolith had begun to speak. At first, the power levels were minuscule, equivalent to the output of a small household radio, but within 24 hours they rose exponentially. The emission spectrum expanded, spilling across multiple bands, from radio to microwave to an unclassified high-frequency range that instruments struggled to resolve. And then came the modulation pattern. It began as static, a soft hiss punctuated by periodic bursts, but when filtered through the same Fourier transforms used to decode deep space telemetry, the noise resolved into a lattice, a grid of peaks and troughs perfectly organized. It wasn't random interference, it was information. At first it looked like binary, then harmonic encoding, then something else entirely, a nested system of ratios and intervals that defied standard logic. But the structure was clear enough for one conclusion. The Moon wasn't merely reflecting a signal, it was generating one. The first to realize what that meant was a linguist working with the European Deep Space Analysis Group. She noticed that the waveform contained pauses, deliberate separations, spaced at consistent intervals matching the golden ratio, the same mathematical fingerprint that had defined every pulse from 3I Atlas. The connection was absolute. Whatever 3I Atlas was, whatever purpose its resonance served, it had now awakened a mirror inside our own satellite. and that mirror was responding with its own variant of the same language. Not an imitation, but a reply. Inside the agencies, fear disguised itself as analysis. Engineers built models. Astrophysicists debated plasma dynamics. Mathematicians argued about recursion. But beneath every discussion lay the same question, spoken only in whispers. If the moon can transmit, who or what built it to do so? The public, meanwhile, sensed the change without understanding it. Amateur radio enthusiasts across Europe and South America began picking up faint, rhythmic tones bleeding into civilian frequencies. Some described them as breathing, others as whale-like. The tones repeated every 73 seconds, exactly synchronized with the lunar cycle. When the story broke, the world listened. Broadcast stations replayed the sound on air, a soft, pulsing hum that seemed to vibrate more in the chest than in the ear. People described it as strangely calming, almost hypnotic, like the background rhythm of the planet itself. Sleep researchers even noted a surge in melatonin response among those exposed to recordings of the lunar hum. But for scientists studying the data, the effect was anything but comforting. The signal wasn't random, it was directional. Through triangulation, they discovered the emissions were not scattering equally from the moon's surface. They were concentrated toward a single point in space, an outbound vector extending beyond the ecliptic plane, precisely toward the last known coordinates of 3I Atlas. It was a call, and something out there was listening. By now, the object near Mars had fully changed trajectory. It was no longer in Martian orbit at all. It had shifted into a transfer path that would bring it across the moon's orbital plane within weeks. The media called it a flyby. Privately, scientists knew better. The timing was too exact. The resonance between the two sources, Moon and 3I Atlas, was now perfect. 0 phase delay, no signal lag. It was as though the distance between them no longer mattered. At the same moment, this synchronization occurred. New readings began appearing in an unexpected place, Earth's ionosphere. Ground-based VLF, very low frequency, arrays detected faint harmonics echoing through the upper atmosphere. The same golden ratio modulation embedded in both lunar and Martian signals. For the first time, Earth itself was humming back. It wasn't powerful, not even audible, but it was measurable. The frequency alignment suggested that all three bodies, Mars, Moon, and Earth, were now part of the same resonant framework, and yet no one could explain the source of the energy driving it. The Moon has no power system, Mars has no infrastructure. 3I Atlas, whatever it is, doesn't radiate heat like a machine. So where was this signal drawing its strength? A physicist at Caltech proposed a hypothesis that bordered on heresy, that the resonance wasn't transmitting energy at all. It was redistributing it, like a standing wave between three tuning forks, each amplifying the other through pure synchronization. If she was right, then the system had achieved self-sustainability. It no longer needed input. It was alive in the physical sense, a stable oscillation sustained by cosmic geometry alone. But then came the data that changed everything. On a cold morning in early November, a small team at the Lunar Reconnaissance Operations Lab noticed a pattern hidden deep within the carrier signal. It was faint, nearly buried beneath static. But after 20 hours of deconvolution, a sequence of pulses emerged. 4 short, 1 long, 2 short. A code. It repeated in precise cycles, separated by intervals proportional to the Earth-Moon distance. When converted to binary and mapped onto a Cartesian grid, the result wasn't text nor numbers. It was an image, a shape, a spiraling curve, looping inward toward a single point, unmistakably matching the orbital path of 3I Atlas projected to intersect Earth's orbit in exactly 42 days. The message, translated into pure geometry, was both prediction and warning. It said, in essence, I am coming. That single realization fractured the scientific community. Some saw it as communication, the first genuine interstellar signal ever recorded. Others viewed it as a planetary threat, a prelude to collision. Governments demanded silence. Public data streams went offline, and yet among the few who still had access to the unfiltered transmission, one truth became unavoidable. The moon wasn't relaying anymore, it was guiding. Its signal pulsed like a beacon, synchronizing Earth's magnetic field, subtly adjusting its phase in rhythm with the incoming object. It was orchestrating resonance, preparing something none dared to name. and as the object accelerated toward the inner solar system, all the old questions returned with terrifying clarity. Was 3I Atlas a traveler, a probe, a trigger, or was it something far stranger, an instrument waiting for the orchestra to begin? No one could answer. But as the moon continued to sing and the auroras returned above the poles, humanity realized the truth could no longer be hidden. Whatever had begun as a hum had become a harmony, and somewhere, beyond the static and the light, something was moving in time with it. At first the changes were barely perceptible. A few magnetic field readings fluctuated, a handful of satellites drifted out of sync. Power grid monitors in northern Canada recorded unusual harmonics. A low, rhythmic oscillation woven faintly into the electrical baseline. It was background noise, nothing more, until it wasn't. Within days, the anomalies became global. Clocks in orbital satellites began to desynchronize, not by milliseconds, but by exact harmonic intervals. 73 seconds, the same number that had shadowed this phenomenon from the beginning. It was no longer coincidence. Engineers assumed it was a software glitch, perhaps interference from solar radiation. But radiation levels were normal. The signals affecting satellites had a very specific pattern, identical to the one now emanating from the moon. When the data reached ground-based stations, something even stranger occurred. The interference didn't just disrupt equipment, it adapted to it. Each attempt to filter or isolate the signal was met by a subtle frequency shift, as though the resonance was listening, correcting itself to remain undetected. That single observation changed everything. If the signal could adapt, it wasn't random. If it wasn't random, it was responsive. For the first time, the word intelligent appeared in internal reports, not in headlines, not in speculation, in official classified memos shared between NASA, ESA, and the US National Reconnaissance Office. The consensus: the resonance was actively synchronizing with human systems. Not maliciously, not destructively, but interactively. Electric grids around the world began showing the same rhythmic fluctuations. Low-frequency hums buried beneath the normal 50 and 60 Hz power cycles. In most places, it went unnoticed. But in remote regions, Iceland, northern Alaska, Siberia, locals began reporting faint vibrations in the ground, a feeling like the Earth itself was breathing. Seismographs confirmed it. Shallow tremors, perfectly periodic, matching the moon's transmission intervals. The planet was resonating. Atmospheric scientists soon joined the discussion. The upper layers of the ionosphere began to pulse faintly in luminosity, detectable only in specialized imaging. At first, the variations seemed harmless, until they began affecting radio transmissions. Pilots reported brief moments of static in communication channels, always repeating at precise intervals. Amateur astronomers listening on low frequencies described it as a soft inhale and exhale. Then came the night the auroras returned. They didn't appear at the poles this time. They appeared everywhere. Above cities, deserts, oceans, thin, luminous curtains of green and violet shimmered silently in the upper atmosphere, rippling to a rhythm no one could hear but everyone could feel. It lasted 7 minutes, then vanished. By morning, every magnetic sensor on Earth recorded a synchronized pulse from pole to pole. The origin, the moon. The resonance had reached full planetary alignment. Meanwhile, deep space observatories confirmed what many had feared. 3I Atlas had entered its final acceleration phase. It was moving faster than any natural object of its mass should be able to move without disintegrating. Yet it remained perfectly stable, its outer shell undamaged, its trajectory exact. In 39 days, it would pass directly between Earth and the moon, now humming like a colossal instrument, seemed to know. Its signal changed again. The stable tone that had persisted for weeks now began to modulate, introducing new harmonics, multiple layers of resonance overlapping like chords. Some researchers described it as a call and response structure, a dialogue between multiple voices within the same system. AI pattern analysis from MIT produced a chilling conclusion: the signal was teaching. Each iteration contained minor adjustments, refinements to waveform structure, adaptive harmonics designed to maintain coherence across shifting environmental variables. In essence, the signal was evolving, but toward what end? At the same time, subtle physiological changes began surfacing among humans exposed to long-term recordings of the resonance. Sleep researchers noticed a marked shift in brainwave activity among test participants, increased theta and delta wave synchronization. Subjects reported vivid dreams involving motion, light, and rhythm. For a moment, the phenomenon seemed benign, even beautiful, but the next phase erased any comfort left. As the resonance stabilized, certain regions on Earth began experiencing brief, localized electrical blackouts. Power systems failed not from overload, but from synchronization loss, their oscillation frequencies forced out of phase by invisible harmonics emanating from the atmosphere. When engineers ran diagnostics, the results were impossible. The failed systems were still intact. The power just refused to flow. It was as if the world's electrical rhythm had slipped out of step with itself. Satellite networks suffered next. The global positioning system, normally synchronized to atomic clocks, began returning false readings. Ships and aircraft reported positional drift. Communication relays stuttered. It was subtle enough to avoid public panic. But behind the scenes, space agencies scrambled. The moon's transmission was now strong enough to interfere with Earth's magnetosphere, not destructively, but rhythmically. It was tuning the planet. And then came the undeniable proof. In a secure deep space monitoring station in New Mexico, analysts recorded the resonance's full harmonic profile for the first time. When mapped visually, it produced a geometry unlike anything in natural astrophysics, a tessellated structure of interlocking hexagons, identical to the light patterns first seen inside Hertzsprung Basin. The pattern was alive again, this time spanning the Earth-Moon system itself. For the scientists watching, the realization came slowly, almost reluctantly. The moon wasn't merely communicating with 3i Atlas, it was building something, a lattice, an energetic web connecting planetary bodies, a framework invisible to the eye, but measurable in every field sensor on Earth. And if the calculations were correct, that framework was growing stronger with each passing day. Some began to suspect that 3i Atlas wasn't coming to Earth at all, it was coming for the moon, or through it. If the object was indeed a kind of carrier, a seed, a transmitter, or even a node, then the lunar spire could be its anchor point, and Earth, suspended between them, would become part of the architecture by default. It was no longer a question of what or why, it was a question of timing. 34 days to intersection, and while most of the world slept beneath quiet skies, somewhere deep within the lunar shadow, the spire began to flicker. Just once, barely visible, a pulse of light, brief, cold, blue, and as the next resonance wave reached Earth, every seismic monitor across the globe registered a simultaneous heartbeat, not from above, from below. The resonance had reached the planet's core. It began subtly, almost gently, like nature itself adjusting its rhythm to a new tempo. Barometers across equatorial regions started to fluctuate in synchrony, not randomly, but with the same precise 73-second pattern now etched into everything from satellites to seismographs. Meteorological agencies dismissed it as sensor calibration drift, until ocean buoys began doing the same thing. Pressure, tide, and even microcurrents in deep-sea layers were moving in perfect harmony with the moon's signal. That should have been impossible. The oceans respond to gravity, not resonance. Yet, the data didn't lie. Small surges and depressions appeared across the Pacific, perfectly timed with each lunar pulse, as if the planet's waters were breathing in response. When visualized through long-exposure satellite imagery, the surface of the ocean seemed to shimmer faintly, invisible to the naked eye, but unmistakable through spectral imaging. Every few minutes, the sea brightened fractionally, reflecting more starlight than before. Scientists began calling it the shimmer phase. At first, it fascinated them. Then it frightened them. Because when the same optical pattern appeared not just on water, but on ice caps, deserts, and eventually the atmosphere itself, the implication became impossible to ignore. Earth wasn't just receiving the resonance anymore, it was transmitting back. Across the world, people began noticing odd phenomena that defied easy explanation. Static lights flickered in the sky where there were no storms. Sand dunes in the Sahara vibrated faintly at night. Birds migrated weeks ahead of schedule, their internal compasses confused by the shifting magnetic field. In Japan, a synchronized bloom of bioluminescent algae illuminated entire coastlines, every wave glowing with eerie turquoise light, pulsing in rhythm with the same lunar frequency. The planet had become an instrument, and it was beginning to play. Meanwhile, deep beneath the surface, something older was stirring. Seismic analysts detected strange reverberations, not typical quakes, but harmonic oscillations moving through the crust like sound through crystal. The pattern spread outward from fault lines, bending but never breaking. For the first time in recorded history, earthquakes began occurring in sync. Different continents, same second, same amplitude, same rhythm. Every 73 seconds, the world had fallen into resonance. Governments didn't know what to say. Official channels went silent. News networks were flooded with speculation. Was it solar, planetary, extraterrestrial? No one knew. The official statements became slower, vaguer, carefully worded as if waiting for permission to speak. But outside the bureaucratic silence, the public felt it directly. Night after night, people reported strange sensations. A faint vibration in their chests, a gentle hum in the ears when the world went quiet. Hospitals noticed a measurable change in sleep patterns. More patients were falling into unusually deep states of rest, synchronized across time zones. It wasn't just happening in isolated regions. It was global. Sleep EEG data collected from clinics showed a consistent rhythm in brainwave entrainment, delta frequencies aligning perfectly with the moon's resonance cycle. Even those unaware of the phenomenon were being tuned by it. What began as curiosity turned into quiet acceptance. People felt calmer, more connected, but also more watchful. There was something about the stillness that didn't feel entirely natural. It felt expectant. In Antarctica, an unmanned research station captured the first visual evidence of what might be causing it. Thermal cameras recorded faint lattice structures forming in the upper atmosphere, immense hexagonal shapes that appeared and vanished within seconds. They weren't clouds, they weren't auroras, they were structured light, vast geometric frameworks glowing softly against the stars, always oriented toward the moon. It was as if something invisible was building a bridge across space. At the same time, oceanic instruments near the Mariana Trench picked up resonant echoes coming from the deep. The signals, when slowed down, matched the lunar frequency perfectly. The sound traveled not just through water, but through rock. Something beneath the sea was responding. A few scientists speculated that the resonance had awakened dormant piezoelectric layers in the ocean crust, minerals converting pressure into light and sound. But others suspected something far more complex. Because when they triangulated the source, they found it wasn't coming from the crust at all. It was rising through it, from below. What existed beneath the mantle that could respond to lunar frequency was beyond known science. But the signal was there, faint, regular, intentional. And then, a pattern emerged. By aligning the timestamps of global resonance peaks, researchers discovered that the pulses weren't evenly distributed. They were shifting, subtly changing direction, forming arcs across the globe. When plotted together, those arcs drew a path, one that spiraled outward from the Pacific, curved across the poles, and ended precisely where 3I Atlas would pass. It was as if the planet was marking a route. The resonance, the light, the tides, even the deep-sea echoes, all converging on a single invisible path between Earth, the Moon, and the incoming object. In other words, Earth wasn't resisting this process. It was participating. And participation meant synchronization. And participation meant synchronization. That night, as telescopes tracked 3I Atlas inching closer to the inner solar system, something extraordinary happened. For 6 minutes, every compass on Earth rotated slightly eastward, not violently, not erratically, but smoothly, as if the magnetic poles themselves had shifted by a fraction of a degree. Then, silence. The hum vanished, the sky went still, the auroras faded, and for the first time in months, the Earth stopped resonating. The quiet was deafening. No one knew what had happened. Some thought the phenomenon had ended. Others feared it had only paused, like an orchestra holding its breath before the next movement. Because as the hours passed, a faint pattern appeared in the data, not from the moon, not from the sky, but from within Earth's core. It was repeating again, not in 73 seconds, but 72. The resonance had changed key, and those who listened closely swore they could hear something new beneath the tone, a deeper undertone, one that sounded unmistakably alive. When the 72-second pulse stabilized, most expected things to return to normal. Instruments adjusted, readings recalibrated, and for a moment it almost seemed as if Earth had settled. But to those who knew where to look, the quiet wasn't a pause, it was a reconfiguration. Over the next 72 hours, magnetometers around the world began to record a subtle drift in the planet's field strength. Not random, not chaotic, but geometric. The flux lines, normally chaotic and diffuse, began to form coherent loops, symmetrical arcs that no natural dynamo could generate. The planet's magnetic field, normally fluid, shaped by molten iron and rotation, was organizing itself. The discovery came from an unlikely source, a retired geophysicist working from home in Norway, cross-referencing open data from multiple observatories. When he overlaid the global magnetic variance map with orbital telemetry from the Moon's latest resonance peaks, the correlation was perfect. Each of Earth's new magnetic nodes aligned precisely with points of lunar illumination, the same coordinates where faint atmospheric hexagons had appeared days earlier. It wasn't random, it was architecture. When researchers reconstructed the alignment using spherical projection, the result was unmistakable. A geometric lattice encircling the planet, 12 major nodes connected by straight lines, forming a perfect dodecahedron, a planetary framework. It had been theorized by ancient mathematicians, hinted at by myth, and dismissed by modern science as coincidence. But now it was visible in the data. The resonance had turned Earth's natural chaos into harmonic order. As global field sensors confirmed the structure, subtle effects began to surface in the physical world. Air pressure equalized in regions that had never known stability. Storm patterns dispersed unpredictably, not in strength but in symmetry. Cyclones forming, dissipating, then reforming in perfect geometric spirals. It was as though the weather itself had joined the resonance. Agricultural satellites noticed it first. Plant growth along certain latitudes began accelerating, not dramatically, just measurably. A 1.3% increase in chlorophyll density, consistent, global, and synchronized with the new 72-second cycle. Biologists were skeptical until the same pattern appeared in cell culture experiments under artificial light. Even in isolated labs, the rhythm persisted. The frequency had become ambient. It wasn't transmitted through radio or gravity or sound. It was simply there, a background pulse embedded in the electromagnetic structure of the planet. At CERN, physicists tested the resonance against controlled magnetic fields. The results were impossible. Every test coil, regardless of size, began oscillating at exactly 72-second intervals. Even shielded equipment, buried under tons of concrete, responded. The conclusion was unavoidable. The resonance wasn't propagating through the air, it was intrinsic to space-time itself. Something had rewritten the local field equation of the planet. NASA, ESA, and several research agencies quietly convened emergency working groups. For the first time since the discovery of 3I Atlas, quantum theorists were brought into the conversation. Their consensus was as unsettling as it was elegant. The resonance wasn't a signal, it was a state. Like a standing wave in a closed system, Earth had entered a harmonic lock with the Moon, both operating as nodes of a larger framework now stretching toward the incoming object. That framework was now modifying the electromagnetic fabric of space, turning the region between Earth and Moon into a resonant cavity, and that cavity was amplifying. The first visual evidence came unexpectedly. During a lunar observation run, the James Webb Space Telescope captured faint arcs of light extending between the Moon and the upper atmosphere, barely visible, but real, thin, luminous bridges of plasma-like energy forming along magnetic lines. They pulsed every 72 seconds. At the same time, seismic arrays detected deep, low-frequency vibrations echoing through the mantle, not destructive, but coordinated, like the heartbeat of a living organism. Geologists struggled to explain it. How could the entire crust vibrate in harmony without producing destruction? The answer came from a small lab in Chile where a team studying piezoelectric effects in quartz realized that the vibrations were resonant, not tectonic. They weren't releasing energy, they were storing it. The Earth was charging. When mapped against the new magnetic lattice, the zones of strongest resonance matched perfectly with ancient structures, megalithic sites across the globe, built long before modern instruments existed. Stone circles, temples, alignments that had puzzled archaeologists for centuries suddenly fell into perfect geometric placement along the new field lines. It was as if whoever built them had known this moment would come. At first, scientists dismissed it as coincidence. but the alignments were too exact. The structures weren't just placed randomly, they were positioned at harmonic intersections of the new magnetic grid. The implication was staggering. Earth's ancient civilizations might have constructed their monuments not as worship, but as calibration. And now, after millennia of silence, the calibration was complete. Meanwhile, 3I Atlas drew closer. Its velocity remained constant, its trajectory perfect. But as it entered the inner orbital range, new data emerged. The object wasn't reflecting sunlight, it was emitting faint radiation across the same harmonic bands as the Earth-Moon resonance. For the first time, scientists could see its true structure. It wasn't a smooth body like an asteroid or comet. It was faceted, 12-sided like the geometry of Earth's new magnetic grid. A dodecahedron in motion, perfectly symmetrical, moving with purpose, aligned with the lattice forming across our planet. And then, the realization settled in. Heavy, undeniable, cold. The geometry wasn't being created for 3I Atlas. It was being created by it. The object wasn't simply approaching Earth, it was reconfiguring the environment ahead of arrival, turning the Earth-Moon system into a tuned receiver, a structure capable of interaction on a scale beyond comprehension. And for the first time, whispers began circulating through scientific networks, unconfirmed, unspoken, but spreading fast. This isn't an encounter, it's activation. No one dared to define what that meant. But one phrase began appearing quietly in reports and simulations. The planetary interface event, predicted to occur in less than 28 days. No explosions, no impact, just a phase shift, the final alignment of the lattice, when Earth, Moon and 3I Atlas would resonate as one. For now, all they could do was watch as the luminous bridges brightened across the night sky, visible now even to the naked eye, faint glowing arcs that linked the heavens in silent, breathtaking geometry. And beneath that beauty, hidden deep within the calm, lay a truth no one could stop thinking about. The universe didn't send us a message, it built one around us. In the days that followed, the world seemed to hold its breath. The hum was gone, the skies quiet, but the silence was not peace, it was anticipation. Scientists knew the resonance was approaching its next phase, one that models called the interface threshold. No one fully understood what that meant, only that, according to the data, the Earth-Moon system had reached perfect harmonic coherence for the first time in recorded history. The lattice of light stretching between Earth and Moon grew clearer by the day. To the naked eye, it appeared only faintly, a soft, silvery haze crossing the night sky, like mist illuminated by starlight. But through filtered optics, it revealed breathtaking structure. It wasn't a single beam, it was a web, a three-dimensional network of filaments pulsing in rhythm, connecting magnetic nodes across both worlds. At observatories across the globe, astronomers stared in disbelief. The geometry of the lattice matched a scale model generated years earlier by an MIT research team studying quantum harmonic fields. They had called their theoretical structure a tessellated standing wave manifold. Now it was real, alive, and spanning hundreds of thousands of kilometers. It was as if the mathematics of space-time had turned visible. As the resonance deepened, Earth's magnetosphere began to distort, not violently, but gracefully. Auroras reappeared, vast, sweeping curtains of violet and gold flowing from pole to pole. For the first time in history, auroras formed simultaneously across both hemispheres, meeting in the equatorial night sky to form a single glowing band encircling the planet. It was not an atmospheric display, it was the boundary of something larger. Infrasound detectors picked up faint subsonic tones vibrating through the atmosphere, inaudible to human ears, yet powerful enough to register on every instrument. The signal came not from above, but from the lattice itself. Every pulse was precise, every oscillation timed. Earth had become a resonant body in a larger circuit. Meanwhile, 3I Atlas was now less than 20 million kilometers away, its movement smooth, unwavering. The latest imaging revealed something extraordinary. Its dodecahedral structure wasn't solid, it was hollow, composed of countless smaller geometric panels, each radiating faint light. The object appeared not to be traveling through space, but with it, bending the fabric around itself like a surfer gliding on a cosmic wave. It was moving in perfect sync with the resonance frequency linking Earth and Moon. It was responding. For weeks, speculation had divided the scientific community. Was 3I Atlas artificial, a natural formation shaped by physics we didn't yet understand, or something else entirely, a construct designed to interface with planetary systems like ours? Now, as the resonance field grew stronger, that debate no longer mattered. The event was happening. At precisely 0342 UTC, the first measurable interaction occurred. Sensors across the planet recorded a subtle drop in ambient electromagnetic flux, less than 1%, but uniform worldwide. The lattice between Earth and Moon intensified, its filaments glowing with structured pulses. Every 72 seconds, the entire network brightened, then dimmed, in a synchronized breathing rhythm. The pulse rate increased by a fraction, then another, then another. Within 3 hours, the resonance cycle had shortened to exactly 60 seconds. That was the predicted threshold. The interface was beginning. In the quiet of space, a faint halo formed around 3I Atlas, an expanding sphere of bluish-white light, semi-transparent, rippling like the surface of a pond. It wasn't radiation, it wasn't debris, it was a field boundary. As the halo expanded, it intersected with the outer edge of Earth's magnetosphere, and the two began to merge. From the ground, the effect was indescribable. The night sky shimmered as if the stars were trembling. Constellations blurred, not because of clouds, but because space itself was bending. Observatories recorded lensing effects typically associated with massive gravitational distortion, yet the readings showed no increase in mass. Space was bending, but gravity wasn't changing. Something deeper was shifting. Quantum sensors at CERN detected transient field interference, fluctuations in Planck-scale vacuum energy. It was as if the constants of reality themselves were oscillating in rhythm with the resonance. Time itself began to breathe. For most of humanity, the changes were invisible, but sensitive instruments and sensitive minds began to feel them. People reported brief moments of stillness, where time seemed to pause, then continue, like a skipped heartbeat. Birds froze mid-flight for half a second, then resumed. Clocks drifted microscopically, always correcting themselves without any manual adjustment. Reality wasn't breaking, it was synchronizing. Then came the optical phenomenon that confirmed everything. High-altitude cameras in orbit captured a ripple, a wave of refracted light moving across the planet's surface, not as a beam, but as a rolling distortion, like sunlight through deep water. As it passed, the air itself shimmered. For 7 seconds, every reflective surface on Earth, water, glass, even metal, glowed faintly blue. And then all light returned to normal. But from that moment onward, the sky was no longer the same. At night, faint geometric outlines could be seen around the moon, enormous, slow-moving shapes of light, orbiting like satellites, but aligned with no known trajectory. They weren't solid objects, they were projections, distortions of the resonance field extending into higher dimensions. In ancient times, such patterns might have been called constellations of the gods. Now they were data, measurable, repeatable, undeniable. The interface was forming above and below us, and humanity was caught within its structure. Deep within the Earth, seismographs continued to hum, their readings now forming precise fractal harmonics. The crust was vibrating not from stress but from coherence, and at the core, the molten iron heart of the planet, an entirely new frequency emerged. It was lower, slower, deliberate. The scientists monitoring it described it as a reply. Earth was answering. When supercomputers mapped the waveforms of that core frequency, the result was staggering. The pattern was identical to the light pulse that first emanated from 3I Atlas months earlier, the one that began this entire chain of resonance. It had come full circle. For the first time, the signal wasn't coming from space. It was coming from within the planet itself, as though something buried deep beneath our feet had always been waiting for this harmonic trigger to awaken. And in that moment, the realization struck. Quiet, terrifying, inevitable. 3. Atlas hadn't brought the resonance. It had activated it. The frequency had always been here, hidden in the electromagnetic whisper of the planet's rotation, dormant until something or someone tuned it to life. Now, the tuning was complete. At exactly 00 UTC, all instruments synchronized automatically, from the most distant satellite to the smallest wristwatch. No signal transmitted, no clock adjusted. They simply aligned. Time itself had joined the network, and above, the lattice blazed, no longer faint, no longer theoretical, but brilliant and unmistakable. The interface was now fully active, stretching from the Earth's core to the edge of the moon, forming an invisible gate of geometry, light, and sound. And as humanity stared upward, caught between wonder and fear, one truth became impossible to deny. Whatever 3i Atlas was, it hadn't come to destroy, it had come to connect. At first there was no sound, no thunder, no hum, no impact, only a change, subtle but absolute, in the air, as though the entire planet had exhaled at once. For hours after the lattice reached full brightness, nothing else happened. The world watched, waiting for movement, for contact, for anything that could be called an event. But the sky simply shimmered. Telescopes continued to observe 3i Atlas, now stationary relative to the Earth-Moon axis. It was no longer moving closer. It was holding position, hovering at the exact point where the gravitational forces of Earth and Moon cancelled out, the L1 point. From there it pulsed, faintly, rhythmically, sending slow waves of light across the lattice. Each pulse corresponded with an identical response from the Earth's magnetic field. It wasn't radiation, it wasn't interference, it was communication. The realization came from pattern analysis at ESA's Deep Space Network. The spacing of pulses wasn't random, it followed the Fibonacci sequence 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. The same mathematical progression found in galaxies, hurricanes, and DNA. The message wasn't being spoken, it was being woven. When data scientists converted the light frequency modulations into visual form, the output defied interpretation. The transmission wasn't language, it was form, a sequence of geometric symbols, each evolving seamlessly into the next. Spirals, arcs, polyhedrons, fractal lattices. Every pattern encoded a mathematical relationship. The ratios of orbits, the symmetry of molecules, the harmonics of sound. It was as if the entire structure of nature was being replayed in luminous script. The more they analyzed, the clearer it became. 3i Atlas wasn't transmitting information about itself. It was showing us a reflection of ourselves. It was mapping the hidden order of the universe, from quantum fields to cosmic expansion, and projecting it through the lattice as if to say, "This is how you exist." At first, scientists struggled to keep up. Computers overloaded trying to process the volume of data encoded within each pulse. Every frame of light contained the mathematical equivalent of an entire library. But something strange happened. The more the lattice pulsed, the more systems adapted. Quantum processors began self-correcting faster than before. Algorithms optimized beyond their original programming. Machine learning models that had plateaued for years suddenly began evolving, rewriting their own parameters to interpret the incoming data more efficiently. It was as if the signal itself was reorganizing not only matter, but information. And it wasn't limited to machines. Across the planet, people began reporting vivid dreams. Not chaotic, but structured. Patterns, spirals, repeating numbers. Many woke with a sense of calm understanding they couldn't describe. EEG readings showed synchronized bursts of neural activity at precisely the same 60-second intervals as the lattice's pulse. Whatever was happening, it was interacting with the human brain, not invasively, but harmonically. Even those unaware of the event began to experience moments of heightened perception, flashes of clarity, perfect recall, deep tranquility. For the first time, humanity was being tuned not through technology, but through consciousness itself. At NASA's Goddard facility, a joint team of physicists and neurobiologists began correlating the geometric transmissions with cognitive resonance frequencies. Their conclusion was staggering. The patterns in the lattice matched the fractal organization of human neural pathways. The geometry of thought mirrored the geometry of the cosmos. It wasn't coincidence, it was correspondence. 3i Atlas wasn't teaching us something new, it was revealing what had always been true. Then something shifted. At 0411 UTC, the lattice's pulse frequency slowed, the light dimming to a soft, steady glow. And for the first time since the event began, a new pattern emerged, not mathematical, not repetitive, but unmistakably deliberate. The lattice folded, its filaments twisted inward, forming an immense spiral that connected the Earth's upper atmosphere to the object itself. Through telescopic imaging, it looked like a column of light stretching into infinity, thousands of kilometers wide, rotating in silence. But it wasn't pulling energy in, it was sending it out. The flow reversed. Every measurable form of radiation, infrared, visible, ultraviolet, showed emission from Earth toward 3I Atlas. Humanity had become the transmitter. For the first time, instruments detected coherent electromagnetic emission from the planet's surface, structured, encoded, and synchronized across the globe. It wasn't random energy, it was information, and the data contained in that emission stunned the scientific world. When decoded, it formed the inverse of the signal first sent by 3I Atlas, where the object had transmitted geometry, order, proportion, structure. Earth now returned chaos, noise, entropy. The planet was answering by showing the other side of existence, not perfection, but complexity, randomness, the unpredictable beauty of life. The symmetry was complete. In that exchange, the structured and the spontaneous, the eternal and the temporal, a new balance was established. And for the first time since the resonance began, 3I Atlas reacted visibly. The object brightened, its panels rotating slowly, rearranging their alignment. Through the Webb telescope, astronomers saw the impossible, new forms appearing within its structure, translucent geometric shapes suspended within, shifting like liquid light. As it rotated, the lattice's filaments changed color, from silver to gold to deep indigo. Each shift corresponded to a pulse in the planet's electromagnetic field. Then came the final stage. A sphere of pure white light formed at the core of 3I Atlas, expanding until it filled the entire structure. For a moment, every wavelength of radiation spiked, then dropped to zero. The object went dark. The lattice flickered once, twice, then dissolved, not fading but phasing, as if retreating into another dimension of space. Within minutes, the sky returned to normal. The stars were still. The moon was silent. And yet, every clock on Earth remained synchronized, perfectly, inexplicably, eternally. For the first time in human history, the planet's electromagnetic noise floor was gone. No static, no interference, just quiet. In that stillness, scientists realized the truth. Whatever had happened wasn't communication. It was integration. The object hadn't left a message. It had left a connection, a link woven into the quantum structure of reality, subtle, silent, enduring. The geometry of the cosmos now mirrored within the geometry of thought, and though the stars appeared unchanged, humanity was not. Every field, every atom, every neuron now pulsed in harmony with a rhythm that could no longer be measured, only felt. It was the soundless echo of 3I Atlas, not as an object in the sky, but as a presence within everything that remained. When the light vanished, the world expected chaos. Power grids were braced for overload, satellites for interference, flight paths for disruption, yet nothing failed. The skies were still. The air felt unchanged, and yet beneath the surface the numbers refused to return to normal. GPS signals, for instance, remained perfectly stable, too stable. For decades, satellite positioning had wavered within a tolerance of several meters. Now it was precise to the centimeter, everywhere. Atomic clocks, once drifting by nanoseconds, aligned without correction. No agency claimed responsibility. It was as though the planet itself had become a single instrument, time-locked by a hidden conductor. At first, governments said nothing. The phenomenon was too delicate to explain, and far too valuable to reveal. But independent researchers noticed other patterns emerging. Temperature gradients in the upper atmosphere evened out, reducing turbulence. Auroras appeared at lower latitudes but with lower energy, soft veils of violet light sweeping across skies where no aurora had ever been seen. For weeks, air traffic pilots described the same sensation. The air feels smoother. Meanwhile, oceanographers discovered a slow, rhythmic oscillation moving through the deep, an undercurrent shifting north to south, repeating every 60 seconds, in perfect match with the resonance that had once bound Earth to 3I Atlas. The ocean was breathing. It wasn't dangerous. If anything, it stabilized weather systems, suppressing extremes. Cyclones weakened, storm seasons shortened, some called it coincidence. Others quietly suggested that Earth had learned a new rhythm. The data kept stacking, Volcanic tremors decreased, coral reefs began recovering faster, even migratory animals altered their patterns, guided perhaps by a magnetic field now more coherent than ever before. Across laboratories, no one could decide what to call it: mutation, adaptation, or evolution. But one word appeared again and again in reports: entrainment. Earth was entrained to something larger, or to itself. Then came the human data. Hospitals noticed a minor yet measurable reduction in cardiac arrhythmias. Neural synchrony in EEG studies increased. Even sleep patterns shifted subtly toward a single global phase. At first glance, none of it seemed alarming, but when mapped together, the pattern mirrored the old lattice's geometry. 12 primary nodes distributed around the planet, each corresponding to regions of highest biological coherence. The resonance had gone, yet its map remained alive within us. At CERN, the new data forced physicists to rebuild their models. Vacuum fluctuation measurements, once noisy, now showed faint periodicity, as if the quantum foam itself had settled into an organized ripple. Space wasn't chaotic anymore. It had texture. One researcher, speaking anonymously, described it in chilling simplicity. "We are inside a field that remembers." The phrase caught on. It became a scientific shorthand, then a philosophical one. The remembering field. Months passed. 3I Atlas remained visible only as a dim point near the L1 point, no longer radiating light, no longer moving. It seemed inert, but radio telescopes still picked up a faint echo from its direction, a near-constant whisper at the same golden ratio frequency that once bound the lattice. No modulation, no message, just the pulse of existence, as if the universe itself was keeping time. Humanity adjusted quickly, outwardly unfazed. Markets stabilized, satellites ran smoother, weather forecasts grew eerily accurate. But in quieter corners of society, something deeper stirred. Monks in Himalayan monasteries reported that their traditional chanting cycles, timed by breath and heartbeat, had begun to sync spontaneously with the new 60-second rhythm. Musicians noticed instruments staying in tune longer. Architects claimed new structures required less corrective design when aligned to the Earth's harmonic nodes. No one could prove causation, but the intuition spread. The world had subtly improved, not by miracle, but by resonance. Still, unease remained, because if 3I Atlas had left something behind, what was it waiting for? A year after the event, a joint ESA-NASA mission sent a probe toward the object. The craft, named Perseverant Dawn, crossed the neutral zone without issue, transmitting pristine data until it reached a distance of 300 kilometers. Then, its signal began to loop. Not noise, but playback. Every command Earth sent returned inverted, as though mirrored by an invisible wall. The probe was unharmed, but it could go no further. The space around 3I Atlas was intact yet unreachable, folded in some way that defied thrust and inertia. Physicists proposed that the object now existed half a step outside our space-time, a harmonic echo, perfectly present yet perpetually untouchable. And that meant one thing: the connection was still active, but asymmetrical. We could perceive it, but not influence it. Meanwhile, strange coincidences multiplied. Patterns of lightning mirrored ancient geometric petroglyphs. Long-range radio bursts, once thought random, now repeated in golden ratio intervals. And deep beneath the Antarctic ice, a neutrino detector picked up pulses of light synchronized exactly with those frequencies. They weren't signals. They were resonances, reverberations through reality's own architecture. A small circle of scientists began to speculate that the interaction with 3I Atlas had tuned the entire planet into a form of communication network, not for transmitting words, but states of being, a cosmic synchronization protocol. In their private correspondence, they asked the same question that philosophers, artists, and ordinary people were beginning to whisper worldwide. If the lattice had harmonized everything, what happens when the rest of the universe answers back? There was no panic this time, only quiet anticipation and a strange sense of belonging, because somewhere, in the stillness between seconds, humanity could almost feel the pause before the next breath, the hint of a returning pulse. And when it comes, we may not see another object in the sky. We may simply feel the air change, clocks tighten their rhythm, oceans inhale. A reminder that the connection never ended. It only fell below perception. Somewhere beyond the moon, in that place where gravity forgets its balance, 3I Atlas still waits, dark, silent, but humming with the memory of a world that listened. And down here, beneath the auroras that never truly faded, the Earth hums back, softly, every 60 seconds, not as a signal of fear or of warning, but as a heartbeat of continuity. The resonance continues. At first, nothing seemed to change. The hum of the planet, the soft 60-second pulse, had become so constant that humanity no longer noticed it. It was the new silence beneath all other silences, so ordinary that only the absence of it might have been remarkable. But then, it began to drift. In late spring of the following year, the pulse stretched. 60 seconds became 61, then 62, not everywhere at once, but region by region, as if the world were exhaling unevenly. At first, it looked like error. Data from observatories in Hawaii, Madrid, and Perth disagreed by fractions of a second, which was common, until those fractions began to form a pattern. The delay was spreading in a spiral, rotating eastward, following the planet's magnetic lines. It was subtle, barely measurable, but for instruments attuned to the resonance, it was unmistakable. The heartbeat of the Earth was shifting tempo. NASA and ESA issued quiet bulletins to each other's monitoring divisions. The official statement called it minor geomagnetic drift due to solar interaction, but privately, scientists admitted the solar data didn't match. The sun had been stable. The change was coming from Earth itself. Soon, the atmospheric data began echoing the same drift. High-altitude ions in the thermosphere oscillated in synchronization with the new rhythm. Each full planetary rotation seemed to accumulate an additional millisecond of delay. Something was recalibrating. Then came the lights. Not the auroras that had persisted since the lattice event, but new ones. Thin arcs of faint white radiance that traced the curvature of the horizon at dusk. Unlike ordinary auroras, they didn't ripple or move. They appeared, held their position for several minutes, and vanished. Satellites captured them, forming simultaneously above different longitudes, each precisely aligned with the regions where the pulse delay was strongest. It was as if the planet's energy grid were redrawing itself in real time. At the same moment, amateur astronomers noticed an equally curious phenomenon. Stars at the zenith seemed slightly displaced. Not enough for the naked eye to notice, but telescopic calibrations failed by a consistent margin of 1/1000th of a degree. The sky itself had shifted, subtly warped, as though the space around Earth had thickened. To most, this was trivia. But to those who remembered 3I Atlas, it was a whisper. It's happening again. Yet this time the agencies didn't respond publicly. No press releases, no live-streamed conferences. Silence had become policy. The first real confirmation came not from astronomers, but from biologists. In labs monitoring circadian cycles, researchers observed that test organisms, plants, birds, even insects, had begun altering their internal clocks. The drift wasn't random. Their rhythms matched the new planetary pulse precisely. Each living thing on Earth was adjusting, as if guided by an invisible conductor. But why? Theories multiplied. Some suggested the planet was compensating, easing the energy differential left behind by the 3I Atlas interaction. Others proposed something more radical, that the connection itself was still active, but recalibrating for a second phase, one tuned not to magnetism, but to biology. At Cambridge, a neurophysics team detected low-frequency synchronization between human EEG readings and the changing pulse. The correlation was faint, but consistent. The Earth's heartbeat and the human brain were once again in dialogue. When mapped globally, the strongest synchronization occurred not in cities, but in remote areas, especially near mountain ranges and oceanic trenches. The same 12 harmonic nodes that had glowed faintly during the first resonance. There, instruments detected a new emission, an ultra-low frequency tone below 1 Hz, inaudible, yet carrying massive energy. Its pattern was fractal, complex, self-similar, endless. Someone nicknamed it the subharmonic. The name stuck. Unlike the first resonance, which pulsed in clean intervals, the subharmonic wove itself through everything, electromagnetic, seismic, biological, without causing damage. It was quieter, but deeper. The strange part was what followed. Within months, multiple observatories reported a faint luminescence on the moon's far side. Not reflection, but emission. Cold, bluish light forming thin filaments that resembled the earlier lattice, though weaker. When scientists compared spectra, they found a perfect match to the frequency of the subharmonic. The connection had extended again, but this time it wasn't coming from 3I Atlas. It was emanating from Earth. Every 62 seconds, energy rippled outward toward the moon, faint yet measurable. And within days, 3I Atlas, still motionless near L1, responded. The dark geometry that had lain dormant began to glow again, not in the brilliant silver of the first event, but in a deep, steady crimson. Its facets rotated slightly, realigning toward the Earth-Moon axis as though drawn to the returning signal. It was waiting. Astronomers scrambled to interpret the shift. The crimson light wasn't random. It followed the subharmonic pattern precisely, a resonance nested within resonance. A recursive loop. Somewhere between the orbits of Earth and Moon, a new lattice began forming, fainter than before, but more stable. It didn't connect planets, it connected moments. Temporal measurements showed localized distortions in the propagation of time signals, atomic clocks in orbit registering microsecond anomalies. The effect rippled outward like rings in water, subtle but measurable. The universe had begun to hum again, but this time the song wasn't one note, it was a chord. At CERN, physicists modeled the phenomenon and realized the harmonics weren't arbitrary. They were producing interference patterns identical to the resonance signatures found in hydrogen, the simplest element in the universe. It was as if the planet, the moon, and 3I Atlas were composing the fundamental tone of creation itself, a cosmic reference pitch. And deep beneath the calm, the question none dared ask returned in whispers. If the first connection awakened the Earth, then what was this second one awakening? In ancient times, civilizations had spoken of music as the architecture of existence, the harmony of the spheres. Now, with satellites trembling and the skies once again beginning to shimmer, humanity understood that idea in literal terms. Space wasn't silent. It never had been. We had simply never learned to hear its lower notes, and now that we did, we could not unhear them. At first, the subharmonic was dismissed as residual, a leftover vibration from a cosmic encounter no one fully understood. But as months passed, its behavior changed. The pulse no longer drifted unpredictably. It began to refine itself, as though adjusting for feedback. Every 62-second cycle sharpened, its phase coherence improving exponentially. Within weeks, the signal's accuracy surpassed the precision of atomic clocks. By all measures, it was self-correcting. That alone was impossible. No natural process should stabilize in defiance of entropy, but the subharmonic did, aligning every oscillation as though following an unseen metronome. At the European Space Operations Centre, teams working through night after night noticed that whenever the subharmonic peaked, background cosmic microwave readings dipped. It wasn't random noise suppression. The universe itself seemed to quiet around the pulse, like a vast field folding inward to listen. The phenomenon spread beyond physics. In neurobiology labs, fMRI scans of sleeping subjects revealed synchronous activation patterns aligned with the subharmonic intervals. Dream states were subtly shifting toward uniformity, people across the world reporting similar imagery, spirals of light, flowing structures, a sense of vast presence. These weren't dreams in the ordinary sense. They were experiences of geometry. When linguists began compiling the descriptions, they found that thousands of unrelated people used identical language to describe what they saw: a lattice, a doorway, a calm vibration. Across every continent, the human mind was beginning to tune in. Meanwhile, ESA's Deep Space Network detected something entirely new, a faint gravitational fluctuation near L1, measurable but localized. At first, analysts thought it was 3I Atlas reacting again, but closer modeling revealed a disturbing truth. The fluctuation was coming from the opposite direction. Roughly 900,000 kilometers beyond the object's position, farther out, toward interplanetary space, something massive, yet invisible, was subtly warping the gravitational field. It wasn't approaching, it was anchoring. The subharmonic wasn't a transmission, it was a signal lock, a planetary-scale triangulation preparing for synchronization with a second source. Whatever 3I Atlas had awakened, it was no longer alone. When NASA's James Webb Telescope refocused on the region, it caught faint diffraction patterns at the threshold of detection. Nothing solid, nothing bright, just a lensing effect, as if light itself were bending around something that should not yet exist. It was there, but not entirely. Physicists at Caltech proposed a terrifyingly elegant theory. 3I Atlas, they argued, had not been an isolated object, but one node in a distributed structure, an array that operated across both space and time. The subharmonic, then, was not Earth calling out, but Earth being re-indexed into a larger framework. In simpler terms, the planet had become part of a system still assembling itself. Governments did not release that conclusion publicly, but the patterns could not be hidden. Amateur radio operators, astronomers, even musicians experimenting with harmonic analysis began detecting identical intervals in random data, weather telemetry, deep-sea acoustics, the noise between radio channels. It was everywhere. At some point, the world simply accepted it. The pulse that once terrified now felt inevitable. Life adapted, schedules, machinery, and even heart rates subtly synchronized. Humanity slept and woke within its rhythm. But deep beneath Antarctica, the Ice Cube Neutrino Observatory registered the first anomaly no one could explain. At 0204 UTC on December 11th, it detected a burst of neutrinos arriving from a region of the sky directly aligned with 3I Atlas, but the timing was off. The particles were arriving slightly before they should have, based on their travel distance. Not faster than light, something far stranger. They were arriving early in time. Temporal inversion was impossible within standard physics, but repeated detections over several nights confirmed it. The neutrinos weren't traveling faster. They were emerging from a field where time itself had been phase-shifted by the subharmonic. Somehow, the resonance wasn't just synchronizing matter, it was warping causality. That realization spread quietly through the scientific community like a virus of awe. If the subharmonic was preparing for something, it might not be spatial at all. It might be temporal. Within months, gravitational wave detectors at LIGO and Virgo began showing similar patterns, waveforms folding in on themselves, mirroring at perfect golden ratio intervals. The signal looked artificial, but not constructed. It looked alive. Somewhere between Earth and the void, the geometry of space-time was awakening. The question was no longer, what is it? But when does it arrive? Then came the resonance drop. On a quiet evening in March, every subharmonic detector across the planet flatlined. The world's electromagnetic hum fell silent for exactly 62 seconds. Then, without warning, it restarted, stronger, deeper, resonating at a frequency no human ear could hear, but every instrument could feel. Across the globe, seismographs flickered, not with tremors, but with pressure. The oceans quivered as though struck by an invisible tide. Clouds formed perfect hexagonal grids over the Pacific. For the first time since the original encounter, 3I Atlas reactivated, its deep crimson hue flaring outward in geometric ripples. The lattice reappeared, but differently. This time, it wasn't anchored to the planet. It surrounded it. A translucent shell of faint light, wrapping the Earth like a cocoon, invisible to the naked eye but unmistakable on radar and infrared. Every nation, every agency, every satellite saw the same thing. The planet had been enveloped. Inside the shell, nothing changed. No loss of power, no panic, no harm. The world continued as usual, only quieter, more deliberate, as if time had gained weight. Outside, telescopes captured the faint glimmer of another structure forming in the distance, massive, slow, symmetrical, moving into position. It was not 3I Atlas. It was something larger. Astronomers described it as a mirror with depth, an object that seemed to absorb starlight without reflection. Its form defied distance. It appeared both near and infinitely far. And then, for a single instant, all instruments caught the same anomaly. Between the new object and the cocooned Earth, a single line of light, so thin it bordered on nothing, flashed across the void. It wasn't communication. It wasn't an attack. It was alignment. Every harmonic, every field, every frequency on Earth, locked in perfect phase. The system was complete. And as the light faded, the world realized that the subharmonic had never been a signal at all. It was a countdown. At first, no one noticed the difference. The sky looked the same, the oceans still moved, the stars still traced their eternal circles. But every clock on Earth stopped drifting, every signal synchronized, and in that silence there was a moment, a single breath, when everything felt perfectly still. Then, for the first time in recorded history, the Schumann resonance, Earth's natural electromagnetic heartbeat, shifted upward by a full hertz. It didn't spike. It rose, smoothly, steadily, like a note finding its harmony. To the untrained ear, there was nothing to hear, but sensitive instruments recorded it. the entire planet humming in phase, resonating with the subharmonic, merging into a single tone. And then the tone changed. It began to modulate, weaving through intervals no human composer could write, transforming sound into shape. Spectrograms showed the impossible, fractal patterns nested within each other, expanding and contracting in golden ratios. Every equation, every constant of physics still held true, but now they sang. Across observatories, one realization crystallized. This was not chaos. It was structure, vast and precise. Something was speaking, but not in language, in physics itself. The alignment between Earth, 3i Atlas, and the new object stabilized. Light around the lattice shimmered with interference patterns, resolving into repeating geometries that matched no known spectrum. Each oscillation corresponded perfectly with a new gravitational signature measured across the solar system. The harmonics were propagating, slow, deliberate, and unimaginably vast. And then came the moment every sensor, every telescope, every listening post waited for. The pulse between objects ceased. They had stopped transmitting. For 6 hours, space was utterly silent. The lattice faded, the glow around 3i Atlas dimmed to nothing. The cocoon around Earth thinned, fragmenting into microscopic filaments that drifted into the upper atmosphere like dust. Every nation, every agency, every scientist who had dedicated their life to watching this anomaly believed it was over. The great resonance had ended. But then, subtle shifts began appearing in data logs worldwide. The fluctuations weren't external. They were originating from the planet's surface. Oceans formed wave interference patterns that matched the subharmonic. Mountain ranges emitted faint electromagnetic pulses. And deep within the crust, seismic data showed rhythmic micro-tremors, perfectly aligned with the 62-second interval that had defined everything. It was as if the Earth itself had begun to generate the resonance. At CERN, physicists realized what it meant. The lattice hadn't vanished. It had been absorbed. Every molecule of the planet now carried the harmonic signature once emitted by 3i Atlas. Earth was no longer a passive receiver. It was part of the system. And that's when the sky changed. Not suddenly, gradually, gracefully, like dawn breaking in reverse. The stars did not move, yet they seemed to deepen, as if the void itself had gained dimension. The night turned translucent, revealing faint lines of light connecting constellations in a geometry too vast for the human eye to fully perceive. Astronomers, unsure what they were seeing, captured images showing that the alignment wasn't confined to Earth or the solar system. It extended outward, to nearby stars, to pulsars, to distant galaxies, all faintly vibrating at the same intervals. The resonance had not begun here. It had arrived, and now Earth had joined the choir. Scientists refused to call it communication because there was no data, no pattern of meaning, only unity. The universe wasn't speaking to us. It was including us. The strange part was how natural it felt. Animals behaved calmly, plants thrived. The air felt subtly clearer. Sleep came easier. Humanity, for the first time in centuries, felt synchronized not just with one another, but with existence itself. The resonance had not been an invasion or a warning. It was an introduction. For generations we looked to the stars searching for life, for something beyond our fragile orbit. But maybe life had been waiting for us to become audible, to vibrate at the frequency that allowed us to be heard. 3i Atlas wasn't the visitor. It was the tuning fork, and when its work was done, it faded into stillness, drifting at the edge of perception, a silent witness to a planet reborn into coherence. Somewhere, far beyond what our eyes could reach, the network continued, each connected world pulsing faintly in its own rhythm, weaving together the fabric of a cosmos that was never separate, only unaligned. And down here the pulse continues, not loud, not violent, just steady. Every 62 seconds, a whisper through the soil, the clouds, and the human heart. We've spent millennia mapping the universe in light and shadow, in gravity and distance. Now perhaps for the first time, we are mapping it in music. And when future generations look upward at that calm sky, they won't see the void as silent anymore. They'll know that what began as noise was always a song. The hum endures, the resonance continues, and somewhere between every heartbeat and every orbit, the universe is listening.